Hello, and welcome to the Sleep Haunt. If you're new here, please subscribe and like the video to support the channel. You can also support us by sending a super thanks on this video. Your support truly helps the channel grow. Now, relax and enjoy the story.
Story number 1. The highway at that hour felt like a river running through nothingness. The blacktop a quiet ribbon drawn between pools of pale fog and distant, sleeping towns. The night was the kind that swallowed sound, soft and heavy, as if the world had pulled a thick blanket over itself. High above, a sky full of stars lay veiled behind low clouds, their light turning the mist a faint, bluish gray. The only real color came from the twin beams of a lone tractor-trailer easing its way through the dark. Elias drove with the steady patience of someone who had spent more years behind a wheel than he cared to count. He sat cradled in the warm cocoon of his cab, shoulders relaxed under the steady hum of the engine. The dashboard glowed a subdued amber, gauges backlit, needles resting in familiar, comforting places. The soft whir of the heater and the quiet hiss of the defroster vents mingled with the faint rattle of loose change in the cup holder. Above it all, the low purr of the tires on asphalt played its unending lullaby. The fog had rolled in gradually, first a suggestion along the ditches, then a shifting veil between fence posts, and finally a thick, opaque curtain that the headlights could barely dent. The world outside the windshield had narrowed to a corridor, two white lane lines, weak reflector posts, the hazy smear of his own lights glinting back at him from moisture in the air. Everything beyond that corridor was an indistinct gray, a soft, endless nowhere. Elias had always liked driving nights. The traffic thinned, the CB chatter softened, and the highway became something gentler, quieter. But even he felt a small tension in his chest when the fog wrapped in like this, turning familiar stretches of road into something mysterious and strangely intimate. The isolation felt closer. The miles felt less certain. Still, he was used to it, and habit made his hands sure on the wheel. The digital clock nestled in the dash read 2:14. The green numbers glowed calmly. His itinerary had him 2 hours ahead of schedule, a luxury in his line of work. According to the last blue reflective sign he'd passed before the fog swallowed everything, he had about 60 miles to go before the big truck stop at the junction. A place with hot coffee, decent pie, and a parking lot always full of humming engines and sleeping drivers. The thought of that familiar glow on the horizon, the warmth of the diner's overhead lights, sat pleasantly in the back of his mind. He checked his mirrors out of habit. The side mirrors reflected only darkness and vague suggestion, a faint, ghostly echo of his trailer's outline, the soft halo of his running lights fuzzed by the mist. The road behind him might as well not exist at all. Up ahead, the fog thickened. The beams of his headlights seemed to shorten, the distance between him and the end of his visible world shrinking. Elias leaned forward, not because it helped, but because everyone leaned forward when visibility dropped, as though proximity to the glass could convince the fog to give up just a little more road. The mile marker appeared slowly on the right shoulder, rising from the whiteness like a small, green ghost. The number stood out in reflective white, 223. He glanced at it and let it slip into the back of his mind with all the other numbers that made up his night, distances, times, speeds. And then, gently, the marker was gone behind him, swallowed by murk. The wipers made a quiet squeak across occasional beads of moisture. The heater brushed warm air against his boots. He drove on. The radio was turned low, some late-night station drifting in and out on a tide of static, soft rock that had outlived its moment, guitar lines and gentle voices that blurred into background texture. Every so often the music would fade, the signal thinning to a whisper beneath the hiss, and then it would swell again as he climbed an invisible rise in the road. It was comforting, that ebb and flow. It meant the world was still quietly going about its business outside his small cabin of light. Time slipped in a peculiar way at that hour. Minutes seemed both stretched and compressed, the mind half in the present, half drifting among old thoughts and small worries. Elias kept his focus pointed ahead, but a portion of his awareness wandered. He He thought of the last cup of coffee he'd grabbed at a lonely all-night station 200 miles back, of the dispatcher's sleepy voice crackling through the line at midnight, of a stretch of highway far to the north where, years ago, he'd driven through an unexpected early snow. He checked the clock again. 2:27 a.m., 13 minutes since he'd noticed mile marker 223. At his steady pace, he should have traveled just over 15 miles. The fog hung just as heavily. The road remained a quiet, two-lane ribbon, empty in both directions. No oncoming headlights pierced the whiteness. No taillights glowed ahead of him. The highway felt strangely private, as if the world had conspired to leave this stretch to him alone. Another green shape emerged softly from the right-hand side, its reflective numbers brightening as he approached, then burning vividly for a heartbeat in his high beams. Mile 223. Elias frowned just slightly. It was a small, quiet frown, the kind you make when you misplace a thought. The truck rolled past, the marker slipping away into the mist. He told himself he must have missed a sign, that maybe he'd misread the first one. Maybe it had been 232, not 223, or 233. The mind played tricks in the fog, and a tired brain gladly filled in what the eyes could not. The clock ticked on. The road hummed beneath him. Another song faded in on the radio, this one a familiar tune from years ago. The melody wrapped around him gently, drawing up faint memories of summer nights and simpler worries. He tapped his fingers just once on the steering wheel. His eyes caught the next flash of green on the shoulder, the small sign swimming into being through the silver gray. He watched it closely this time, leaned a fraction of an inch nearer to the glass as the numbers came sharp and clear. 223. The number hung there in his beams for a beat longer, as though reluctant to confirm itself, then slipped past. It was unmistakable. The same set of digits, the same position relative to the small dip in the road, the same weathered paint on the metal post. Elias' hand drifted from the wheel just long enough to adjust the radio, turning the volume down until the music was barely a whisper. The cabin fell mostly silent, save for the engine's faithful drone and the faint rush of air around the cab. The white lines slid steadily under his truck. The fog pressed in. He felt the first small prickle at the back of his neck then. Not fear exactly, but a subtle awareness, like the sensation of being watched by something that was only half there. He swallowed, more from dryness than unease, and glanced at the clock. 2:41 a.m. He did the math without quite meaning to. It didn't add up. Even if he had misread one sign, he could not have mistaken 3 in a row. The rational part of his mind began to assemble explanations. Faulty markers. A small maintenance loop of highway reusing old signs, though he knew that made no real sense. Maybe he'd taken an unnoticed exit ramp in the fog, ended up on a parallel frontage road. Maybe he reached for the GPS unit mounted near the center of his dash. The small screen glowed softly, its map simple and stylized. A thin line traced his route. According to the device, he was exactly where he should be, eastbound on the interstate, the little arrow marking his truck gliding forward, eating up distance. No loops, no wrong turns, no missed exits. The speedometer read a steady 62. Ahead, the world remained the same short tunnel of dim visibility, fringed in gray. Another green sign gathered itself from the mist, numbers waiting, quiet and white. 223. This time, the number sent a soft chill through his chest, a delicate thread of cold that did not quite reach his hands. Elias felt something in his awareness shift, a realization settling in that whatever small, orderly narrative he'd been building to explain things no longer fit around the edges of what was happening. The highway had taken on a quality he'd felt only a few times before, on other nights, in other conditions, when distances stretched oddly, and the world outside seemed to slip just a half step out of alignment with his expectations. He flicked on the CB, more for company than information. The familiar crackle and pop filled the cabin, followed by silence. No banter, no distant voices swapping weather reports or joking about state troopers. It was as though every other trucker on that stretch of road had, for one night only, chosen to stay home. Anybody eastbound passed marker 223. His own voice sounded oddly hushed in the cabin, more respectful than nervous. It was the tone people naturally took on in churches and library stacks, in rooms where others were sleeping. Only the low hiss of open air replied. The CB's orange display cast a patient glow. Somewhere between stations, the faintest whisper of a far-off voice rose and fell, too indistinct to hold words, then vanished. He drove on. The next time the number slid into view, it didn't surprise him. It simply confirmed the quiet pattern now settled around him like a second fog. 223. Advance, hum of rubber on pavement, the faint sway of the cab. 223 again later. The clock proceeded obediently. 251, 3, 02, 3, 14. As though this small loop of highway still existed within time, if not entirely within geography. The world beyond the shoulder had become an abstract painting, blurred suggestions of fence lines, dark smudges that might be trees, a hint of a rise or hollow now and then. No intersections, no off-ramps, just the endless, familiar, unfamiliar road. Finally, through the mist, a different shape appeared. It started as a smear of pale light, then resolved gradually into the glow of a sign arched over the highway, faded white with peeling blue, the kind that announced services ahead: gas, food, lodging. The letters came into focus as he neared. Junction Ridge, next exit 1 mile. Relief curled through him, not sharp, but like a gentle exhale. The truck stop he'd been thinking of. The lights, the coffee, the presence of other people. Whatever odd loop he'd found himself in, a real exit, a real cluster of buildings would anchor things. That's what he told himself, because that's how the world should work. He passed the sign. The fog thickened, then eased slightly, as if parting for this one small outpost. The green exit marker appeared ahead on the right, its reflective face damp with mist. He took the ramp, turn signal ticking softly in the cabin. The trailer followed in a smooth, familiar arc. The texture of the pavement changed subtly under his tires. As he climbed the gentle curve of the ramp, lights materialized ahead, soft yellow pools against the darkness, blurred halos in the mist. The outline of a large sign on tall poles emerged, then sharpened. A white rectangle bearing a name in red script, letters just old enough to feel out of time. The lot spread out beneath it, a wide, flat expanse of asphalt dotted with a small forest of parked trucks, their running lights glowing like patient eyes in the night. The sense of strangeness loosened just slightly. Elias pulled into an open slot near the edge of the lot, aligning the long body of his truck with the painted lines by force of habit. He set the brake with a soft hiss, the cab giving a gentle sigh as the air pressure shifted. For a moment he simply sat, hands resting on the wheel, listening to the new silence, the distant tick of other engines, the occasional clink of metal cooling, the faint, almost musical hum of the highway beyond. Out here, the fog thinned. It hovered in low, drifting patches between the trucks and around the bases of the light poles, as though unwilling to fully breach the circle of comfort created by the truck stop's lights. The building itself loomed invitingly ahead, a long, low structure with big windows, the warm glow from inside painting rectangles of gold on the damp pavement. He climbed down from the cab, his boots touching the ground with a soft, solid thump. The air outside was colder than he'd expected, the mist damp on his face, beating on his jacket. The smell of diesel and distant coffee mingled with the faint scent of wet asphalt and night. He walked toward the building, footsteps muffled. A few other figures moved in the lot, shadowy shapes of drivers stretching their legs, hoods popped on a couple of rigs, someone climbing into a sleeper berth. No one looked directly at him, but their presence alone eased the tightness between his shoulders. Inside, the diner portion of the building was only half full. A row of stools lined the counter, and a smattering of booths hugged the windows. The overhead lights were a little softer than most truck stops he knew, more yellow than white, giving the space a slightly older, cozier feel. A jukebox squatted in the corner, the chrome dulled with age, its neon frame casting a faded glow even though no music played from it. He slid into a booth by habit, the vinyl sighing under his weight. A waitress appeared after a moment, pen and pad in hand, her smile small but genuine, her hair swept up in a style that felt like it had wandered in from a different decade. Her name tag read Marie in embossed plastic. He ordered coffee and a slice of pie without really thinking. As he waited, he let his eyes wander. The walls were decorated with old trucking posters, sun-faded photographs of rigs from the 60s and 70s. Framed newspaper clippings curled slightly at the corners. One showed an image of the very truck stop he sat in, its parking lot full, the caption proclaiming its grand opening. The edges of the page had yellowed, the print just slightly blurred with age. A small CB radio sat on a shelf behind the counter, its microphone hanging by its cord. From where he sat, Elias could see the unit's power light glowing a dim red. Every so often, a faint crackle issued from its tiny speaker, a whisper of open air. No one in the diner seemed to pay it any mind. Marie set the coffee down in front of him. It steamed gently, carrying with it the familiar, comforting scent he'd been seeking. The first sip was hot and bitter and exactly what he needed. The pie arrived a moment later, apple, flaky crust, just warm enough to send up its own thread of steam. It tasted of cinnamon and something like nostalgia. "Fog's thick out there," Marie said conversationally, topping off his cup. Her voice was soft, its cadence unhurried. "You coming from the west?" He nodded. "Yeah, long stretch of nothing. Thought I was never going to see this place." She smiled in a knowing way. This place has a way of showing up when folks need it. Been that way a long time. There was something in the way she said it that made him glance again at the aging photographs on the wall. The same logo. The same long, low building. Different trucks, different drivers, but the bones of the place unchanged. The CB behind the counter crackled more sharply, as if clearing its throat. A voice seeped out, thin and distant, distorted by time and static. "Anybody else stuck out by marker 223? Fog's got the road running in circles." Elias' hand, halfway to his coffee cup, paused. He looked toward the radio. Marie didn't turn. No one in the diner seemed to notice the transmission. The tiny red power light glowed steadily. The voice continued, fading in and out. There was weariness in it and a hint of strained humor, the way drivers spoke to each other late at night. "Been out here feels like an hour, same sign, over and over. Anybody reading this, give me a holler." Elia's skin tightened with that same quiet chill, not sharp but undeniable. He watched as the waitress moved to another table, chatting softly with a pair of drivers. The radio's voice dropped lower, then rose again, as if moving closer. "Mile 223, fog's thick as soup, feels like I'm stuck in a loop." The room felt suddenly like a place layered over itself, then and now coexisting in the soft clatter of dishes and the low murmur of conversation. Elias set his cup down with care, listening. The voice on the CB gave a small, distracted chuckle, then trailed into static. For a moment, he thought of walking up to the counter, of asking Marie how long that radio had been on, whether anyone had answered it. But something in the drowsy calm of the diner, in the way the other drivers sipped their coffee and stared at the television in the corner, made him hold his tongue. The moment felt fragile, like a thin piece of glass that might crack if handled too directly. He finished his pie. Coffee warmed him from the inside out, smoothing the edges of his unease. Fatigue reminded him of its presence in the weight behind his eyes, in the heaviness settling into his shoulders. When he finally stepped back out into the night, the fog seemed lighter, the air a shade less dense. The truck lot lay quiet and orderly, lights standing gentle guard. He climbed back into his cab, closed the door, and sat for a moment in the familiar nest of his controls and instruments. Before starting the engine, he glanced at the GPS. The display showed his location at the junction, neat and certain. His route to the east stretched ahead in a clean, simple line. On the highway again, the world outside felt subtly changed. The fog still lingered, but it no longer pressed so insistently against the glass. Visibility widened by 100 yards or two. The road, in its quiet, reflective way, seemed to have remembered that it was allowed to go on. The next mile marker he passed read 237. The numbers flashed in his headlights, then were gone. He watched, almost holding his breath as the next came. 238, then 239. The ordinary sequence reasserted itself with a comforting inevitability. Behind him, the lights of the truck stop dwindled, then vanished into the mist. Elias drove on under a soft, cloud-dimmed sky, the highway unspooling steadily ahead. The strange loop of 223 receded into the rear view of his thoughts, joining all the quiet oddities and near-unspoken stories that made up a long-haul driver's private folklore. Somewhere far behind or far beside the straight line he now traveled, there might be a stretch of road that folded in on itself, a piece of highway caught like a scratch on a record, replaying the same faint note for those who wandered into it. And maybe, at the edge of that loop, there was always a warm building with yellow lights and old photographs and a radio that sometimes, late at night, picked up voices that had already driven through and gone on. He drove in silence for a long while, letting the gentle hum of the engine and the rhythm of the passing lines lull him into that peculiar alert calm of the night driver. The fog thinned gradually, stars beginning to show through rifts in the cloud cover. The clock on the dash ticked past 4:00 a.m. By the time the first pale hint of dawn touched the eastern horizon, the memory of mile marker 223 had taken on the hazy softness of a dream upon waking, unsettling in its way, but wrapped now in the quiet comfort of survival and forward motion. Another story folded into the long, drifting song of the road. Story number 2. The mountains had a way of swallowing the world long before midnight, drawing in the last scraps of color and sound, and leaving only the slow, patient breathing of the earth. Up along the spine of the range, the highway clung to the slopes like a narrow gray thread, curling and looping through the folds of rock and forest. On clear days, you could see for miles, layers of ridges fatting blue into the distance, valleys like dark green bowls holding sleepy towns and winding rivers. But that night, there was no distance at all. There was only fog. It lay thick on the asphalt, a low, silvery sea that lapped up against the steel guardrails and tree trunks and the concrete pillars of bridges. It rose from the ravines in quiet, swirling breaths, drawn up from cold streams and damp earth, then spread across the highway like a blanket. Headlights hit it and turned it into glowing milk. Taillights vanished into it as if into deep water. Lena watched the fog thicken as she climbed. Her hands rested loosely on the steering wheel, gloved fingers shifting an inch here, an inch there as the road wound its way upward. The big truck's engine hummed with steady strength, a deep vibration that flowed up through the floor and the seat and into her bones. The dashboard lights painted her face in a muted glow, green and amber and soft red. The clock above the radio read 1:38 a.m. This was a new route for her. After 15 years of running mostly flatland interstates and long desert stretches, her company had shifted her to a mountain lane that needed a reliable night driver. "It's not bad," the dispatcher had said. "Windy in places, a little lonely, but the pay's good and the schedule's yours. Just watch that pass between Hollow Creek and Ashford. Weather does strange things up there." She laughed it off in the office, the way drivers always did when someone mentioned strange. Everybody had their stretch of road with a reputation. Some whispered about odd lights in the sky over a certain Iowa cornfield. Others swore a particular desert rest stop always felt like stepping off the edge of the map. Stories clung to truck stops and CB lines like dust. You listened, you nodded, and you drove your miles. but alone on the way up through the switchbacks. The memory of the dispatcher's voice had a way of drifting back into her ears, quiet as the hiss of the defroster. The first sign that the highway was changing came as a smell. Lena noticed it when she cracked her window an inch to let the cool air in. The wind that slipped into the cab no longer carried the dry scent of late summer pines alone. There was something else there now, a dampness, a hint of metal and stone, the faint cold breath of water from somewhere far below. She could almost hear it beneath the engine's low roar, a murmur in the ravines where streams combed through the rocks. The fog began as wisps at the edges of her headlights. It clung to the ditches first, then crept up the banks. It turned the trees into darker smudges against a soft, grainy backdrop. The world outside her windshield lost its sharpness, lines softening, edges blurring as if the night were exhaling. She flipped on the fog lights out of habit. Their beams spilled across the pavement like twin pale fans, catching the painted center line and shoulder as it curved ahead of her. Her speedometer hovered just under 40. On a dry, clear night, she might have been impatient with that pace, but she'd seen enough weather and enough twisted guardrails in her time to know better. The mountain demanded its own kind of respect. On the CB, a low murmur rose and fell. Drivers talking about way stations 2 states away. Someone complaining about a missed turn. The chatter came and went, faint and intermittent as her rig wound higher, until eventually it grew thin and distant and then slipped away entirely. The last voice ghosted out in a crackle of static, and the channel turned to a soft, steady hiss. She turned the radio down and let the quiet fill in around the engine noise. Outside, the fog drew closer. The next sign she noticed was the one on the right shoulder, a green rectangle with white letters that glowed back at her as she passed. Hollow Creek Pass, ELEV. 4,320. A smaller sign beneath it warned, caution, fog and ice. Someone had stuck a faded sticker to the post. Too small to read at that speed, but she caught the impression of a smiling cartoon truck and a line of text. It disappeared into the mist behind her. Lena eased the wheel left, following the curve. The guardrail kissed the edge of her vision. Beyond it, the land dropped away into gray nothing. The fog rose thicker from that side, roiling up from the unseen depths. The dark line of the mountain on her left pressed close, rocks and trees loomed and slipped by. It was like driving through the spine of a cloud. She felt the familiar stirring of attention in her chest, heightened, careful, a quiet gathering of focus. Nothing dramatic, just that extra notch of awareness that settled over a driver when the road narrowed and the margin for error thinned. Up ahead through the layered gray, a pinprick of red bloomed. It was small at first, no more than a suggestion of color, then it sharpened into a pair of taillights, solid and steady. Some other vehicle crawling the pass ahead of her. Lena relaxed a fraction. There was comfort in not being the only set of wheels on the mountain. As she gained, creeping up the long grade, more of the vehicle took shape in her lights. She saw the faint, square outline of a trailer, the white sides turning ghostly in the fog. The twin red lights hung at the back, unwavering, moving with the same patient rhythm as she climbed. No other lights showed around it. No hazard flashers, no brief wink of a turn signal. Just those 2 small, constant red eyes. She set her foot gently, letting her rig settle in behind at a respectful distance. 35 miles an hour felt about right to her. It seemed about right to the other driver, too, whoever they were. Mile after mile, curve after curve, the 2 trucks wound their way along the pass together, separated by 50 yards of mist and road. Lena's gaze drifted to the upper left corner of the trailer, where most companies stamped their names and logos. Through the fog and shifting glare of her own headlights, she caught only glimpses. A block of color, faded, something once bold now subdued by weather and time. The outline looked old-fashioned. Not the sleek, modern branding she saw on most highways now, but something boxier, simpler, from another era. She squinted, trying to make it out as the road straightened briefly. The letters resolved for half a heartbeat. The name on the trailer was one she knew, but not from the present. It tugged at some dusty memory from early in her career, a company her first trainer had talked about, back when she was still learning to handle 18 wheels. Smoky Hollow Freight, that old hand had said with a wry smile, leaning back in a plastic truck stop chair 15 years ago. Used to run this pass all the time, 'fore they folded. Boys up there said the fog had a life of its own. Some still won't take that stretch after dark. Say there's a truck that never quite made it home, still running the curves. Back then she'd written it off as another ghost story traded over stale coffee. But there it was now in her headlights. Smoky Hollow, the letters worn and chipped. The logo a simple line drawing of a truck climbing a hill, outlined in blue. The paint looked dull, as if it had sat under too many seasons of sun and rain. She watched the trailer's side panel slide by in front of her, the plastic rivets catching faint glints. Her stomach made a small, unsettled flip before her mind stepped in with reasonable explanations. Some small independent had bought up old equipment, maybe. Or the company name had lived on in a reduced form she'd never noticed. Trailers moved around, got sold and resold. There was always some logical thread if you looked for it. The CB crackled. Lena's eyes went reflexively to the unit mounted above her. The display showed Channel 19, the familiar numbers lit in soft green. She had turned the volume down so low she should have heard only a murmur, but the sound cut through clearly now, thin but sharp, like a voice speaking from the bottom of a well. "Eastbound on Hollow Creek, you there, driver?" The voice was male, rough with years, but not unkind. It carried the lazy drawl of mountain country, slow vowels, easy consonants. She reached up and nudged the volume knob. "Yeah," she said, thumbing the mic. "Got you, eastbound, common up on the pass, go ahead." "Copy that," a faint chuckle. "Fog's layin' and heavy tonight, ain't it?" "Like the road's driven straight into a cloud," she replied. "Barely see past my own hood." "Best to let the mountain set your pace on nights like this. You behind me there, driver." She glanced at the dim red taillights ahead. "That a Smoky Hollow trailer I'm following." Silence, then a small, thoughtful pause. Been a long time since anybody called it by that name on this stretch. Most just say the old rig nowadays. Another soft laugh, this one with something like affection in it. "But yes, ma'am, that be me." Something about the way he said it, simple, unbothered, as if this were the most natural thing in the world, unsettled her more than any denial might have. "Didn't think that outfit was still running," she said, choosing her words carefully. "We're around," the man replied. "Least I am. Mountain knows my route by heart." The CB hissed gently around his words. "You watch yourself a hair tighter round the next bend now. Guardrail's out for a spell. Road crews haven't been up since the last slide." Lena's brows knit. She hadn't seen any notices about road damage on her trip plan. No closures, no construction warnings for this section, no bulletins from dispatch. Out of sheer habit, though, she eased off the accelerator a notch. The curve arrived quietly, its approach hidden in the fog's even softness. Only the slight tightening of the yellow center line and the way the reflective posts on the left drew closer together gave it away. Her headlights swung wide as she followed the turn. For an instant, the beam reached out over nothing. To the right, where the guardrail should have been, there was a gap, a 12-foot absence of steel and posts. Loose gravel spilled slightly over the edge where the shoulder crumbled. Beyond that, darkness, a fall into unseen space. Lena felt a bead of sweat form beneath her collar despite the cool air. The trailer ahead of her hugged the lane with practiced precision, leaving a good foot between its tires and the broken edge before straightening again. She swallowed, thumbed the mic. "Appreciate that, driver." "Not a problem," he said calmly. "Not everybody knows this pass like they used to. Ought to post a better warning up here, but the mountain's quicker than the paperwork." Static brushed the edges of his words. "You runnin' through for the first time?" "First time on this run, yeah," she admitted, eyes never leaving the red dots ahead. "Used to flatland routes. Dispatcher said it'd be a change of scenery. The man chuckled, and something in the sound reminded her of another laugh, her first trainer's, that same almost fond amusement. Scenery's good on a clear day, stars like you wouldn't believe. Fog's got its own kind of personality, though. They drove in companionable silence for a while after that. The highway twisted and unwound, coils of asphalt looping around the mountain's dark ribs. The taillights ahead never wavered, never sped up impulsively on the straights or drifted wide on the tight corners. Whoever drove that old rig knew each rise and dip by feel. The CB came alive now, and then with his quiet observations. Little rockfall on the inside there. Stick close to the white line. Bridge common up here. Road gets slick on the steel when the fog soaks it through. Good to knock 2-3 miles an hour off the top. The fog thickened and thinned like the breath of some vast, sleeping thing, denser in the hollows, lighter on the ridges. Once, as they crossed an especially deep ravine on a high, narrow bridge, Lena caught a fragmentary glimpse down through a gap in the guardrail. Water far below, moonlight diffused through mist catching its surface in faint, shifting gleams. The sensation of height made her stomach dip. "Smoky Hollow Bridge," the driver said softly over the radio, as if reading her thoughts. "Wind likes to play tricks on rigs here. Keep both hands on the wheel and don't look down too long. Fog can make you feel like the whole world's moving sideways." She obeyed, keeping her eyes fixed on the line of red lights and the barely visible lane markings. For a brief, disorienting instant, as a gust of wind pushed against the broad side of her trailer, she did feel it. The uncanny sense that the truck was sliding, not forward along the bridge, but sideways into the white beyond. She corrected gently, breathing out slow, and the sensation passed. By the time they left the bridge behind and started the long, spiraling descent toward Ashford, she realized she'd lost some concrete sense of time. The clock on the dash told a coherent story. 2:19 a.m., then 2:27, then 2:34. But the miles themselves felt oddly stretched, woven more from the pattern of curves and warnings and brief, companionable static than from minutes and markers. Somewhere along that descent, curiosity uncurled itself in her chest. "You run this pass every night?" she asked, voice low. "When someone needs it," he replied, as if that were an answer that didn't require elaboration. "Fog gets bad, mountain gets lonely. Road doesn't like to be empty too long after dark." Lena considered that. "You live down in Ashford." A longer pause this time. The CB hissed and popped gently, like fat rain on a tin roof. "Been a long while since I called any one place home," the man said at last. "Got used to the road being my front porch. Smoky Hollow bought it, I kept driven. Some habits are hard to set down. A quiet breath. Truth be told, I like the nights. Easier to hear yourself think when the world's hushed." His words settled over her like another layer of fog, not ominous, just slightly out of step with expectation. Behind his voice, faint and distant, she thought she heard something. The echo of wind against a hollow frame, maybe, or the thin, metallic clatter of loose chains. It sounded old somehow. Up ahead, the taillights dipped as the road curved into a long, gentle left. Through a thinning pocket in the fog, she saw, just for a moment, the outline of the truck itself more clearly. The tractor was a model she hadn't seen on the road in years, a boxy cab-over design, all angles and flat surfaces. Its silhouette was unmistakable, a style that had given way long ago to sleeker shapes. The paint on the back of the cab looked scuffed, the edges of the Smoky Hollow logo faint. No modern aerodynamic fairings, no satellite dome on the roof. Even the way the exhaust stacks caught her headlights spoke of another time. Her heart beat an odd, deliberate rhythm as she watched it sway gently into the next bend. Rational thoughts lined up neatly and tried to present themselves. Show trucks, restorations, collectors who loved old iron. Any of those could explain an antique rig pulling a modern trailer up a foggy mountain pass at 2:40 in the morning. The CB crackled again, before those thoughts could fully settle. "Sharp right common up, no warning sign," the man said. "Seen too many folks coming hot thinking it was just another lazy curve." She listened, adjusted, followed the red lights as they dipped and swung. The turn was indeed tighter than the rest, angled just enough to catch anyone distracted. The outside edge fell away into a wall of dense fog. No lights shone from below, no hint of civilization. Only whiteness, swallowing everything. "Appreciate the lookout," she murmured. "Just passing it along," he replied. "Old timers looked out for me when I was green. Feels right to keep the chain going." There was a faint sound in his voice then, a note of distance that tugged at another memory. Her first year on the road. A veteran named Cal who'd ridden with her for 2 months, teaching her how to read the sky, the feel of the steering wheel, the way certain stretches of road like to tell you things if you paid attention. He'd retired to a little house by a river, or so the last rumor went. She'd always meant to stop and see him one day, but the miles had a way of stretching between intentions. Without quite knowing why, she asked, "You ever train any newbies out here?" Guy named Cal mentioned this pass once, said the fog was like something living. The silence that followed was longer and stranger than before. "Cal Walker," the man said slowly, as if tasting the name. Tall fella, wore his cap too low, laughed like he had all the time in the world. Lena's grip on the wheel tightened. The memory of Cal's laugh rose, unbidden and crisp. "He taught me my first winter tricks," the driver said. "Showed me how to feel black ice through the boot soles. That was Lord, long time ago now." A pause. "He make it off the road all right?" "Yeah," Lena said quietly. "Last I heard, he's sitting by a river somewhere. Taught me how to handle a stick shift on a hill without rolling back. Said this pass knew your name." Another soft chuckle, more a breath than a sound. He always did have a way with words. The fog began to thin in fits and starts as they lost altitude. First a bit of tree trunk here, distinct and dark rather than just a smudge. Then the faint suggestion of lights far ahead, trembling through the mist like a distant town yawning itself awake. The asphalt looked less wet now, the sheen dulling as the air dried by increments. Ahead the 2 red taillights glowed steadily, patient as ever. "You'll be common up on a junction in about 3 miles, the driver said. "Big green sign, 2 exits. Stay left if you're heading to Ashford proper. Right'll take you down a back route. Road's narrower than it looks at night and the fog clings to it longer. Might as well stick with the main." "That's me," she replied. "Got a drop at the Ashford depot." "Then you're almost there." There was something like warmth in his tone now, as if he were genuinely glad for it. "Leave the mountain to itself the rest of the night. She'll take care of the next one's needing it." She wanted to ask him then, about the rig he drove, about how long he'd been running this pass, about why his voice carried that faint echo of another era. She wanted to ask if he believed the stories dusted across dispatch offices and late-night diners, stories about a Smoky Hollow driver who had gone over the edge one foggy night decades ago and never really left the route. But the junction rose ahead faster than she'd expected. Through the thinning mist, a large sign loomed, ASHFORD 2 MILES, an arrow pointing left, County 19, River Road, arrow right. Sodium vapor lights on tall poles cast a soft orange glow over the diverging lanes. The old Smoky Hollow trailer's taillights moved toward the left lane. Lena followed. As they approached the split, the fog thinned in a final, reluctant veil. For the first time, she saw the side of the cab clearly. The company name on the door was the same faded Smoky Hollow script as on the trailer. Beneath it, in curling, chipped letters, was a driver's name painted by hand in an old style, the kind no corporate fleet used anymore. She had time to pick out the first name only, HARLEN, before the angle changed and the rig was in front of her again, blocking the view. Her breath caught. Her heart made that slow, deliberate thud again, like the pause between one word and the next. The exit sign swept by overhead. The highway split gently, lanes parting like the strands of a braid. Lena stayed tucked in behind her guide, the two of them taking the left fork. The town's lights came into clearer view ahead now, a scattered cluster of yellow and white in the valley. "All right, driver," the man said. "Road straight from here. Depot will be on your right just past the second light. Big gravel lot, can't miss it." "Guess this is where we part ways," Lena replied, surprising herself with the reluctance in her voice. "For tonight," he said. "Fog's a touchy thing, comes and goes. When it rolls in thick and folks don't know her turns, somebody's got to show the line." His chuckle was almost inaudible. "Keep your eyes open. Road talks. You'll be fine." "Maybe I'll catch you on the flip side," she offered. "Maybe you already did," he murmured, the words so soft she was half sure she'd misheard them. Then, just before the next gentle curve, the tail lights ahead of her blinked once, twice, as though in farewell. She blinked too, instinctively, as a denser patch of mist swept across the lane. It took no more than 2 seconds. When the fog thinned again, the highway ahead was empty. No red lights, no boxy silhouette, no old trailer with faded paint. Just the straight stretch of road diving down toward Ashford, the white lines glowing under her headlights, the distant town lights beckoning. Lena's foot eased off the accelerator without her quite meaning it to. Her truck coasted, engine brake whispering. She scanned the lanes, the shoulder, the gentle slopes down toward the dark shapes of trees. There was nowhere the other rig could have gone. No exit. No wide pullout big enough to hide a full-length tractor-trailer. The CB remained quiet, Channel 19 a soft blanket of static. She cleared her throat, thumbed the mic one last time. "Smoky Hollow, you still up there?" Only the faint hiss answered. In the background, for just a second, she thought she heard it again. That thin rattle of loose chains, the sigh of wind against an old door. Then it was gone, folded back into the sound of her own engine. By the time she rolled into the Ashford Depot's gravel lot and set her brakes, the fog had retreated to the mountain shoulders behind her. The sky overhead was a softer black, the hint of dawn still hours away. Sodium lights buzzed quietly over the loading bays. A lone attendant in a reflective vest waved her into position with sleepy professionalism. Inside the small office, as they signed papers and exchanged the clipped phrases of late-night logistics, Lena's gaze fell on a framed newspaper clipping on the wall behind the desk. The photo showed a much younger version of the depot, a line of trucks parked in front like a proud parade. One of them, near the center, bore the Smoky Hollow logo on its trailer. Next to it stood a man in a dark jacket and cap, one hand resting on the grill. "Old outfit used to run this route," the attendant said, following her gaze. "Smoky Hollow freight, before my time, but my granddad drove for them. Always said the mountain had a favorite." He smiled faintly. "Harlan Morse. Swore the man could drive that pass blindfolded." The name prickled at her skin. "What happened to him?" she asked, voice soft. "Fog took him far as anyone could tell," the attendant replied, shuffling paperwork with practiced movements. "Back in the 70s. Went over near Smoky Hollow Bridge one night. Never found much. Folks still tell stories, though. Say when the fog gets real thick and you don't know the turns, there's an old rig with Smoky Hollow on the side that'll ride ahead of you, keep you out of the ravines." He shrugged, half embarrassed by his own words but unwilling to dismiss them completely. "Mountain looks after its own, I guess." Lena didn't answer. She didn't need to. Later, back in her cab, with the engine ticking softly as it cooled and the first pale suggestion of dawn just brushing the rim of the far hills, she sat for a moment with the lights off. The cabin held the faint warmth of her body, the lingering scent of diesel and coffee and cold air. In the side mirror, she could see the silhouette of the mountains rising against the sky, their shoulders still wrapped in traces of fog like shawls. The CB sat quiet on its bracket, the channel display glowing its soft, faithful green. She reached out and turned the volume down to a bare whisper, not off, just low enough that if, some night, the fog rose thick and unfamiliar again, She might still hear a calm, weathered voice cutting through the static, pointing out the missing guardrail or the slick bridge or the sharp right without a sign. Out on the highway above, the mountain waited patient and unhurried, the fog coming and going in its own secret rhythm. Somewhere in that white, drifting world between ridges, an old cab-over might still be tracing the curves it knew by heart, taillights glowing like small, steady embers in the dark. Story number 3. Out on the lowlands, where the fields stretched wide and flat and the highway cut a patient line through soil and marsh, fog did not fall from the sky. It rose. It seeped up from canals and irrigation ditches, from flooded furrows and still ponds, from the damp breath of the earth itself. It began as a faint smokiness above the water, then thickened into pale, drifting walls that moved with invisible currents, soft and slow, like ghosts learning to walk. Rena watched it gather as she headed east. The road ahead of her was a straight, steady strip of asphalt, 2 lanes in each direction divided by a grassy median. On either side, the land lay open, rows of orchards in disciplined grids, flat squares of winter-stubbled fields, occasional clumps of trees around old farmhouses whose windows now glowed faintly against the dark. High above, the sky was a deep, cloud-hushed black, its stars hidden, its edges softened by the rising mist. Inside the cab, the world was small and warm. The dashboard lights brushed her hands in green and amber. The hum of the engine, the distant whir of the refrigerated trailer's unit, the soft tick of a loose button on her jacket against the armrest, everything blended into a low, constant music. A travel mug of coffee sat in the cup holder, its lid screwed tight, a faint curl of steam escaping near the drinking spout. The air smelled of roasted beans, faintly of diesel, and just a hint of the pine air freshener clipped to the vent. The digital clock on the dash read 3:07 a.m. She rolled past a big, reflective sign planted in the shoulder. Its white letters leapt out as her headlights struck it. Dense fog area, next 20 miles, use caution. Rena exhaled, long and slow. She'd seen these signs before. This stretch of highway, threading between rivers and irrigation canals, was known for its two-leaf fog, a low, rolling blanket that could erase the world in the span of a mile. On some winter mornings, the news channels filled with talk of pileups and near misses in this very corridor. She had shifted her schedule later to miss most of the commuter traffic. At this hour, the highway belonged more to truckers and a few insomniac travelers. The first wisps of mist licked across the lanes a mile or 2 later. At first they were just that, stray tendrils of white, slipping low across the asphalt like smoke from some invisible fire. Her lights caught them, brightening them briefly before they slid aside. The ditches on either side of the road filled with a pale glow, the hidden water underneath lending the fog a strange luminosity. Soon, the distance at which headlights appeared short. The faint, far glimmer of an oncoming car's beams now arrived suddenly, washing across the fog in a diffused halo before the vehicle swept past and was gone, tail lights swallowed within 100 yards. Rena's world began to narrow. She eased her speed down, foot light on the pedal. The tires hummed their low song. The trailer followed in its steady way. The center lines on the pavement glowed white in the beams. The outside lines solidly framed her lane like rails. On the CB, Channel 19 was a quiet hiss punctuated now and then by a distant voice, too faint to make out. Like someone speaking from the bottom of a well, she left it on, more out of habit than expectation. In this kind of fog, most drivers focused inward, eyes and hands and thoughts turned toward the tunnel of visibility in front of them. She reached over and flicked the regular radio on, letting it scan through stations. Each step blip brought a flash of something, an advertising jingle, a bit of pop song, the rolling cadence of a preacher's voice, fading to static, then another station. The scan hesitated on a strong country station, slid past a talk show debating some far-off policy, then skipped to an empty swath of snow. Then, abruptly, the soft voice of a DJ slid through the static, as though he'd been waiting there all along. And you're riding the night with KLMR, for all you late-mile haulers out there on the Marshland Expressway. Sky pulled a blanket over her head and the fog's rolling in, so keep it slow, keep it steady, and keep it here. The call letters, KLMR, were unfamiliar. Rena's brows folded a little. She drove this region often enough to have a mental map of the bigger stations, the ones whose towers blinked red in the night above small, unsleeping towns. This one rang no bell, but his signal came in clear as glass. She thumbed the steering wheel, then left the radio where it was. The DJ's tone was low and smooth, threaded with a kind of weary cheerfulness that felt suited to the hour. "We're taking calls until 4 for anyone running Fog Row tonight," he said. "If you're out there in that white suit between mile 40 and mile 60, give old Dale a shout. Tell us what you're seeing. In the meantime, got a request queued up from a driver named Helen out near mile marker 38. Says she's trying to stay awake and stay in her lane. This one's for you, Helen." A familiar old trucking ballad filled the cab, steel guitar, a voice with dust on it singing about miles and home and long nights. The kind of song that had played on truck stop jukeboxes before they were replaced by flat screens and streaming playlists. Rena felt her shoulders loosen a bit. The music fit the slow, muffled world outside. The fog thickened. It didn't descend in dramatic fashion. It just quietly decided to be closer, denser, more sure of itself. The visible world at the front of her truck shrank to a soft, glowing tunnel maybe a couple of 100 feet long. Beyond that, the gray-white turned solid, impenetrable. The tops of the roadside trees vanished. Only their lower trunks remained, dark smudges at the edge of the road. Signs appeared without warning out of the pale, their reflective faces burning bright, then vanished behind her like small ghosts. She rolled past mile marker 43. The green post was slick with moisture, the numbers beaded with tiny droplets that caught her beams. She took note the way drivers always did, unconsciously building a map of progress in her mind. Her speed held steady at 45, comfortable, unhurried. On the radio, the ballad faded. "All right, that was Long White Line for Helen now." 38, Dale's voice returned. "Fog's only getting thicker, folks, so tell me where you're at. We got Jim in a flatbed somewhere near 45. Jim, you reading me?" A click, a faint change in the sound quality. Then another voice, a little tinny, came through. It sounded like it was coming over a phone line or a CB patched into the broadcast, duller than the DJ's studio bright tone. Yeah, Dale, gotcha," the caller said, a little breathless. "Jim here, rollin' eastbound. Man, I don't like this stuff tonight. I can barely see past my bumper. Just went by one of those little green markers, 43, I think. There's a big cypress tree on the right that always looks like it's reaching for the road. Every time gives me the willies in fog like this." Rena's fingers tightened gently on the wheel. She had just passed 43, a minute or two ago. She remembered the cypress. It did lean slightly, its dark, crooked branches hook-like against the whiteness. It was coincidence, she told herself. This stretch of highway saw plenty of trucks. Her mind flipped through the possibilities. Jim might be a mile ahead, a mile back. The fog made distance feel elastic, and truckers told the same stories, pointed out the same landmarks again and again. "Hang in there, Jim," Dale said warmly. "You're doing fine. Fog's like an old dog, it'll huff and puff, but if you keep your voice calm and your roots steady, it'll settle down. You seeing any brake lights out there, or you got the road to yourself?" "Feels like it's just me and the ghost of this highway," Jim replied with a nervous chuckle. "Haven't seen another soul since that billboard with the peeling orange soda ad. You know the one." Rena's headlights bloomed over a billboard on the right. The colors on it were mostly gone, but here, and their patches of faded orange clung to the image of a bottle tilted in midair. The paint was cracked, the smiling face at the edge worn away to a suggestion. She drove under it in silence. Dale hummed once, thoughtful. "Yeah, I know it. Been watching that thing rot away since they put it up. They keep changing brands at the new store down at the junction, but nobody bothers touching that old sign. Papers rustled faintly in his studio. The sound came through her speakers like a whisper. Why don't you tell me what mile it's at, Jim? We'll give folks an idea where the curtain's the heaviest. MMM, Jim's voice faded slightly as if he'd turned his head away for a moment. Hard to say, but hang on, there it is. Marker 46. Yeah, 46 just slipped by. Feels like I've been between 40 and 50 for hours, though. Rena's gaze cut to the shoulder, searching for the next green post. Her headlights pushed the fog aside in a barely adequate wedge. A shape loomed, sharpened, resolved. 46. She drove past it, radio murmuring on. It was possible, she thought, that Jim was describing what she was seeing because he was where she was, at this same point of the long, wet ribbon. Maybe his truck's taillights were just beyond her sight, swallowed by fog's equal hunger for everything. Maybe her own rig was invisible to him in his mirrors, nothing but a faint sense of pressure on the air. Still, a delicate unease traced its fingers up her spine. The calls continued. A woman's voice came on next, speaking from somewhere at 51, give or take. She described the way the fog pooled in the shallow dips and rose in slow motion ahead of her grill. A man in a tanker truck reported a patrol car's lights faint and blurry in his mirror 2 miles back. Someone else talked about a rest area turnout that felt like it had been lifted out of the world, its vending machines humming in a bubble of silence while fog pressed all around. Each caller named their rough position. Each number that left their lips arrived on cue outside her windshield. 48, 51, 53, like beads on a single string. It all might have been chance, a common root of human attention, a coincidence of timing. But as the minutes folded into one another and the white walls closed in, the coincidence began to feel too precise. Rena reached for her coffee and took a slow sip. It was cooler now, but still warm enough to comfort. The taste grounded her, a solid thing in a soft-edged night. She checked the CB. It remained mostly quiet, just the occasional distant crackle that might have been a voice 2 ridges away. Whatever these callers were using to reach KLMR, it wasn't cutting through her usual channels. Back on the radio, Dale's voice dropped, turning reflective. Fog's an old companion on this stretch, he said. Has a way of making the miles feel longer, don't it? For those just joining us, you're listening to KLMR on the late shift. We're talking to drivers braving the marshland mist between mile 40 and mile 60. If you're in that patch and got a story, a warning, or just a hello line, open. A tiny click, a pause. Somewhere far away in a lit booth she could not see, a light must have blinked on. All right, looks like we got one more on the board. Says here, Rena, reefer load, out near mile 55. Paper rustled again. You with us, Rena? The coffee cooled rapidly in her hand. Her name floated through the cab, intimate as if someone had leaned in close. The pronunciation was right. The detail, reefer load, sat with casual accuracy. Her gaze shot to the GPS fixed to her dash out of pure reflex. Her current mile wasn't displayed there, just a neat map and a quiet blue line tracing her route east. But in her head, the markers lined up. If she had passed 53 a minute or two ago, 55 was only a short way ahead. She swallowed, feeling the warmth of the coffee slide down, then set the mug back in its holder with care. The urge to reach out, if only to say nothing, brushed across her like a hand. But this wasn't a CB. This was something else. On the radio, the DJ's voice waited, gentle and expectant. Take your time, he said softly, though she had not made a sound. Fog like this does strange things to the nerves, no rush. Another click, a faint shift in the quality of sound, as if another line had opened. Then a woman's voice came through. Yeah, the voice said, a little rough around the edges, seasoned by too much coffee and not enough sleep. Yeah, I'm here. Rena's own breath stalled in her throat. The voice sounding from her speakers was hers. Not just similar, not just close. It had the same cadence, the same barely there rasp on certain consonants, the same way of drawing in a breath before a longer sentence. Even the background noise, engine hum, subtle vibration, matched her own environment exactly. "Well, glad to have you, Rena," Dale said, without a flicker of surprise. "Tell us where you're at." "Think I'm common, up on 55, the other Rena replied, and the words drifted through Rena's cab like an echo. "Fog's so thick I can't see my hood ornament. Got that sense like the world's been folded down to what's in my headlights, and the rest is just memory." Rena's dash clock ticked from 3:28 to 3:29. Her eyes lifted to the road, to the gray-white blankness that began at the nose of her truck and extended, unknown, beyond. The sense of folding was exactly how she would have described it if someone had asked, as if the rest of the world lurked just behind the curtain, waiting, but for now her reality was 2 lines of paint and a tunnel of light. "So what's on your mind?" Dale's voice was calm, almost soothing. "This your first dance with Thule fog?" "Not my first," the other Rena said, "but it's different tonight. There's this station." A soft, uncertain laugh. "Yours, I guess, KLMR, I don't know how I found it. Keeps calling out what I'm seeing like it's happening on a loop." Rena's fingers tightened around the wheel. He laughed. It was a low, friendly sound that moved through the speakers like warm air. "Well, that's the thing about nights like this. Stories tend to collect in the low places. You keep driven the same road, certain miles remember certain words." There was a pause on the line, then the other Rena spoke again, her voice slightly smaller. "You ever get the feeling," she asked, "that the road's trying to say something back?" Rena's truck glided past a green sliver on the right. Her lights flared over it. 55. The number shone briefly, beaded with dew, then was gone. "More often than you'd think," Dale said quietly. "But that's why you called, isn't it? Something out there feeling off." "Yeah," came the answer, a breath and a word so similar to what Rena herself would have said that she could feel the shape of it in her own chest. "About a mile back I saw something in the fog, up ahead. Looked like a work truck pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights flashing slow. Thought maybe there was construction or a breakdown. Then it was gone, nothing but white." Rena's eyes slid to the hazy band beyond her headlights, as if it might offer a preview of its contents. "You ever run this stretch before?" Dale asked. "Couple times," the other Rena said. "Don't remember any construction zones. That's what's got me thinking. Like something's borrowing shapes to get me to tap the brakes." Rena's right foot hovered, indecisive, above the pedal. The highway ahead gleamed faintly, a pair of pale parallel lines disappearing into the fog. The DJ exhaled, a sound halfway between a sigh and a chuckle. "You're not the first to say that. There's an old story we get from time to time, back when folks still listened to 'em in bigger numbers, about a night in '86, thick fog just like this. Big pileup near 57, couple of cars, pair of rigs, one little sedan that didn't stand a chance. Whole mess started, cause somebody saw hazard lights that weren't there." He let that sit, just long enough to ripple through the cab but without dwelling on it. No details, no dramatics, just the suggestion of memory tucked into asphalt. "Since then," he went on, voice gentle, "every so often we hear about shapes in the fog around that mile. Work trucks, police cruisers, even a man standing in the lane with a flag turning back and forth real slow. You know what all those folks have in common, the ones who talk about it after?" "What?" the other Rena asked, as the real one silently held her breath. "They didn't stop," he said, "didn't swerve. They held their lane, eased up slow if they had to, but they didn't chase what they couldn't quite see. Fog likes to play at being something solid. Road likes you better when you remember what is and isn't really there." The line was quiet for a moment. In Rena's cab, the sound of her own engine seemed louder. Ahead, the fog did what fog always does. It thickened, thinned, shifted in subtle, swirling eddies her eyes could almost but not quite detect. Shapes suggested themselves and then slipped away. A darker smear on the shoulder that might be a tree stump. A faint, angular shadow that could be a sign. Her heart nudged her to be ready. Her hand stayed steady on the wheel. "All right," the other Rena said at last, voice firmer. "Then I guess I'll just keep my lane." "That's the spirit," Dale replied. "Remember, Rena, headlights show you pavement, not promises. Let the ghosts play tag with each other. You just drive." He chuckled softly, then his tone shifted back toward the more familiar cadence of a host. "You take care out there now here. Lines are open for another half hour. KLMR's ridden the night with you." A click, the call dropped. Music swelled, a slow, melancholic guitar piece that matched the stretched, silvered world outside. For a moment, Rena wondered if she had imagined the conversation, that perhaps her brain had folded her own thoughts into what she heard, filling in gaps with familiarity. But the words had been too layered, too responsive, too aware of a story that wasn't just hers. She realized then that she could feel a subtle tension in the air ahead of her. Not anything she could point to, not something the mind could measure, but a prickling in the part of her awareness that had, over the years, learned to interpret small cues. The way a trucker learns to feel a patch of black ice before consciously seeing it, or sense a fatigued driver drifting before they cross the line. The fog's brightness seemed to intensify slightly up ahead, becoming a more concentrated white. The faint smear of light on its surface suggested something reflective. Her foot went gently to the brake, just enough to drop a few miles an hour. Not slamming, not reacting to any single thing, just easing, listening to both the road and the words that still vibrated faintly in the air from the speakers. Then she saw it. A shape coalesced in the glow of her headlights. The pale, angular outline of a work truck's rear panel, parked half on the shoulder, half intruding into the right lane. Hazard lights blinked lazily at the outer edges, orange pulses smeared wide by the moisture in the air. A reflective triangle sat on the pavement a few yards behind it, its red outline bright and clear. It looked soft somehow, not wrong exactly, but slightly out of focus, even in the center of her being, as if someone had sketched it quickly in light and fog and not quite finished the lines. The truck's details were smudged, no readable lettering on the side, no license plate numbers that her eye could catch. In the diffused halo around it, she thought she glimpsed motion. A darker patch, vaguely man-shaped, moving back and forth near the driver's side door. Her hands kept the wheel straight. Her speed dropped another notch, but she did not yank left. There was no oncoming traffic that she could see, but the median's far lane was its own unknown. The work truck did not resolve further as she neared. No sound of an idling engine reached her ears through the damp air. The blinking of the hazard lights felt slightly too slow, each pulse stretching out then snapping off, like an imperfect memory of how they should behave. 10 seconds. That was all. 10 seconds of approach in which every small instinct shouted different possibilities. At the last moment, just as she should have been able to make out the shine of chrome or the dirt on the bumper, the entire scene seemed to thin. The work truck's edges blurred, then feathered. The blinking lights lost their color, became simple faint flares in the fog, then bled away into the whiteness. The triangle on the pavement wavered, its bright red lines dissolving into streaks of light, as if someone had passed a hand through a painted canvas. Rena drove through that space with both hands firm on the wheel, her eyes wide. Her truck rolled over solid asphalt. There was no bump, no jolt, no physical presence at all, only fog and the faint rush of her own tires. Her chest loosened only when the white around her settled back into its broader, less focused glow. Her throat was dry. She swallowed and reached, automatically, for the coffee. The mug was cool to the touch now. Her fingers curled around it as though it were still a source of heat. On the radio, the song came to an end. Dale's voice returned, softened, almost wistful. "Some nights," he said, "the highway remembers too much. sends the same scenes back out to float around in the mist, hoping someone'll see them different. Sounds like you did, Rena, wherever you are. She didn't answer, couldn't. The radio didn't expect her to. A few miles later, the fog began to lift. It did not vanish at once. It shredded. It pulled back in ragged curtains, revealing more of the world in layers. First the tops of trees, then the shapes of distant barns, then the faint crown of a low hill far ahead. The sky began to separate itself from the land as a distinct, lighter arch. The wet sheen on the road dulled as the air dried by degrees. Rena passed mile marker 60. The green post stood straight and clear, its digits crisp. There were no more warnings about dense fog beyond this point, just the usual lull of night highway. She reached for the radio dial, intending to see what other stations the lowlands air might carry at this hour. Before her fingers touched it, she listened. "This has been the late shift with KLMR," Dale was saying. "We'll be signing off till tomorrow night. To all you drivers who joined us between 40 and 60, thanks for keeping us company in the white. Remember, what's in your lights is real. The rest is just stories trying to see if you're listening. Good luck out there." A soft click followed. The static rose a brief tide, then flattened. The numbers on the display stayed the same, 1070 AM, but the signal changed completely. Where Dale's easy drawl had been, there was now only faint noise, the indistinct murmur of faraway stations too weak to properly claim the frequency. She turned the knob a fraction. The static shifted, but nothing else emerged, just fragments. A distant choir, a crackling commercial, a thin thread of foreign speech. She left it off. The rest of the drive felt oddly open. With the fog gone, the horizon returned, a dark line separating earth from sky. A few other vehicles joined the road, an SUV with a roof box, another rig with a livestock trailer whose faint animal sounds carried briefly on the air when they met at a fuel stop. Life flowed back into the landscape in soft, ordinary currents. In the morning, after her drop and a few hours' sleep in the bunk, curiosity tugged at her again. She found herself lingering over her phone, fingers searching for KLMR in station lists, maps, directories. The app spun its little indicator, then populated with towers and frequencies. There was no KLMR within 100 miles. She searched wider. Call letters, region, any trace. Nothing matched. It was as if the station existed only inside that 20-mile stretch of fog and the hours between 3 and 4 in the morning, a voice folded into damp air and low cloud. Later still, at a truck stop cafe a few towns over, she heard a pair of older drivers at the counter trading quiet talk over their eggs. They spoke of Thule fog, of the way it erased sound as well as sight, of a time when AM radio was king of the night. One of them, a man with a beard gone mostly white, mentioned, almost offhand, that old ghost station, a late-night program from decades ago that took trucker calls and was rumored to have still been heard, faintly, long after its physical tower fell in a storm. Did it help anybody? The younger of the two asked, skeptical but not entirely dismissive. The older man shrugged, watching the coffee swirl in his cup. Depends who you ask. Some folks say they got warned in time. Others say it was just their own good sense talking back at M in a voice they could stand to hear. Rena didn't join in. She just listened, letting the murmur blend with the clink of cutlery and the soft, endless buzz of highway talk. That night, when she found herself again approaching the lowlands and saw the reflective sign whispering of fog ahead, she checked her mirrors, her gauges, the tautness of her own hands. Then, as she rolled under the first thin fingers of mist, she turned the radio to AM and slowly, carefully, tuned it toward 1070. Static met her, just static and the faintest impression of something behind it, like a forgotten song. She drove on anyway, headlights pushing through the whiteness, tires singing on the damp road. The memory of a calm, unseen voice folded quietly into her thoughts, reminding her that the road and the fog and the night all had their stories. And that sometimes, if you listened just closely enough, those stories would bend themselves away from replaying the worst parts. Outside, the fog rose again from the fields, soft and silver, waiting to see which drivers would hear and which would only see. Inside, the cab stayed warm, the coffee hot, and the miles passed under her wheels, steady and sure. Story number 4. On the turnpike that crossed the wide middle of the country, the highway sometimes felt less like a road and more like a long, measured machine, steel and concrete and quiet electronics humming together beneath a sky that, at night, belonged mostly to the trucks. Overhead, gantries stretched across all lanes at regular intervals, their metal frames supporting cameras and sensors and big rectangular panels that, by day, flashed weather advisories and travel times in bright amber letters. By night, most of those panels slept, their faces blank and dark, waiting. On this night, the fog made everything else wait, too. Malik's truck rolled east with the slow patience of someone who had taught himself to trust minutes more than miles. The refrigerated trailer murmured behind him, keeping a steady, chilled hold on the produce stacked tight inside. His cab was its own small world of warmth and light, the dashboard washing his hands and the lower half of his face in a gentle green glow. He sat comfortably in the worn driver's seat, shoulders relaxed but eyes sharp. He'd been on the turnpike for hours, a long stretch of toll road that charged him by the mile and rewarded him with smooth pavement, wide shoulders, and service plazas spaced like quiet islands across the map. The digital clock above his stereo read 1:57. The world beyond his windshield was a softly glowing tunnel of gray. Fog had been in the forecast when he left the last plaza, but forecasts were abstractions until fog became a physical thing. It had begun like a thought, thin veils drifting across low spots, a slight dulling of the stars overhead. Then it had climbed. It moved up from the river bottoms and low, flat fields that flanked the highway, risen out of drainage ditches and shallow ponds, and swelled up to meet his headlights as if answering their call. Now it sat thick and low, a pale, luminous sheet hugging the pavement, erasing the far horizon. The beams from his truck's headlights reached out only a couple of 100 feet before dissolving into white. Taillights of any vehicle ahead, if there were any, would appear late and close. Overhead, the sodium vapor lights on tall poles glowed as rounded halos, their usual sharp outlines blurred by moisture. Malik eased his speed down to 50. The engine note softened. The feel of the wheel under his hand seemed to sharpen, the faint pull as the tires ran along the gentle slope of the crown pavement, the slight shift when passing over expansion joints in the old concrete sections. He switched on his fog lights, their lower, broader beams lighting up the slick surface of the road more than the distance ahead. Inside, the faint hum of the climate control blended with the constant, reassuring rumble of the diesel. The air smelled of coffee and the hint of citrus from a half-peeled orange resting in a napkin near the cup holder. The CB radio was on but quiet, just a low bed of hiss. He passed under a gantry. The metal structure loomed suddenly out of the mist, then swept overhead and vanished behind him, its boxy silhouettes briefly outlined against the dim sky. The panel mounted to it was dark. A mile or so later, another gantry emerged. This one had its panel lit. Amber words glowed through the fog, each letter soft around the edges, as though someone had written them in steam on glass. As he drew nearer, the message sharpened into focus. Fog ahead. Low visibility. Reduce speed. He nodded to no one already on it. The advisory was standard, unremarkable. Still, it settled something in him. It meant the system saw what he saw. It meant the highway was awake, watching. He drove on. The turnpike stretched ahead in a straight, unfussy line. On his left, the westbound lanes were empty, a mirror of damp pavement and occasional guardrail glimpsed through the moving veil. On his right, a wide shoulder and then faint shapes of trees and sound barriers, their details lost in white. Every few seconds, Reflective posts on the roadside flashed in his lights, little white blinks marking distance and placement like subdued metronomes. The sense of isolation grew, but it was a familiar kind, one he had made peace with years ago. Born in a city where noise never entirely faded, Malik had once been uneasy with this kind of hush. Over time, though, he'd learned that some silences weren't empty. They were just full of smaller sounds, the soft breathing of the truck, the whisper of tires, the tick of the dash clock advancing minute by minute. He passed the sign for exit 314. Its reflective green face materialized out of the fog and vanished again almost in the same breath. The service plaza after that exit would have been an option, but he'd chosen to keep rolling, feeling alert enough, coffee still warm enough. Ahead, the fog brightened slightly. The next gantry resolved from the mist, its horizontal beams beaded with moisture that glinted dully under the overhead lights. The sign between its struts glowed again, amber letters forming and holding. Check mirrors. Use left lane. Fog PATCHES. Malik frowned lightly. That was more specific than the last, less generic than the usual advisories. He did what it said anyway. He was not in the habit of arguing with safety suggestions. He signaled, glanced in his mirrors out of habit more than trust. They showed only the dim, ghostly smear of his own trailer lights, and eased into the left lane. The steering wheel responded with that faint, soft notch as he crossed the lane markings. He passed under the gantry. The tires hummed a slightly different note on the lane's center strip, barely noticeable. The road still seemed empty, quiet, featureless, but that suggestion of specificity from the sign lodged in his mind. Fog patches in weather like this felt like saying rain patches in a hurricane. He checked the CB, nothing but hiss. A few minutes later, as the monotony settled back onto his shoulders like a heavy coat, the subtle sense of being observed crept in around the edges. Not the prickling paranoia of being followed, nothing so sharp. More like the feeling of walking through a house with the knowledge that someone else was awake in another room, present but unseen. He rolled past mile marker 318, the number bright for a beat in his lights. The next sign ahead glowed earlier than he'd expected, its halo appearing through the fog like a low-hanging moon. This time the amber letters were already in place as he approached. They looked steady, no flicker or glitch, but the words themselves made his pulse step up a notch. Do not use. Right lane. Obstruction ahead. The phrasing was plain, utilitarian. Still, something in it carried an urgency that the previous notices hadn't. Malik's eyes narrowed slightly. He was already in the left lane. He glanced toward the right instinctively, though there was nothing to see but the smooth gray sheet of mist. He passed beneath the gantry. The fog seemed to thicken on the far side for a few seconds, turning his headlights into white walls. He eased off the throttle just a fraction more. The obstruction announced itself almost too late for comfort. Through the glow, a darker shape blossomed at the outer margin of his beam, low, bulky, half on the shoulder and half intruding into the right lane. As his truck drew closer, the form sharpened. A box truck old style, its rear doors patched with mismatched paint. No lights on, no hazards flashing. It sat dead and dark in the fog, a muted, hulking presence that would have been nearly invisible until dangerously close if he'd been running that lane. As he slid past in the left lane, he caught faint details. The way the condensation beaded and ran down its panels, the gentle sag of a flat tire on the shoulder side. There was no one standing beside it, no flashlight waving, just the silent, abandoned box in the mist, like something forgotten. He exhaled, not realizing until then that his breath had tightened. The turnpike systems were good, he knew that. Sensors and cameras linked to a control center miles away watched for unusual patterns, automatically switching messages when they detected trouble ahead. That could explain it. That should explain it. He let that reasoning settle over him like a blanket as the empty road stretched forward again. Even so, He found himself waiting for the next sign. It did not keep him waiting long. He saw the gantry's outline first, muted and skeletal against the gray. Then the amber light came into view, the panel's glow blurred, then clarifying. For a moment, the sign seemed to be between messages. The letters on it flickered, segments of characters lighting and dimming in a half-formed jumble, like someone scrolling through phrases too quickly. Malik slowed a touch more, curiosity and caution aligning. The light steadied as he reached reading distance. Check your speed. Check your name. Check your MIRRORS. His hand tightened on the wheel in spite of himself. The first line made sense. That was routine. The second and third, not so much. He felt the tiniest urge to glance around, as if someone might be playing a prank from a catwalk above, holding a hidden projector. No one was there. The gantry passed overhead, its black steel silently dripping rainwater and condensed fog. Check your name. On the radio, a low saxophone piece played, something he'd tuned in from a late-night jazz station near the state capitol an hour before. The music now felt like a soundtrack layered clumsily over a scene that had turned unexpectedly strange. He did check his mirrors because not doing so felt more unsettling than obeying. They offered only what he expected: the dim, ghost-bloomed shape of his own trailer in the center, the empty curves of road sliding away on either side. No headlights approached from the rear. No vehicle rode alongside. He did not at first check his name. The dashboard seemed suddenly brighter than it had a minute ago. The backlit digital display that showed his current lane and toll class also scrolled his truck. ID. A string of letters and numbers linked to the transponder on his windshield. His company had added a small convenience to the display, a field with the driver's first name, meant to keep rigs from getting mixed up in the yard. Malik. The letters sat there in soft green, ordinary as ever. They looked like they always did, but tonight they also looked like an answer to a question he hadn't known was being asked. Fog pressed close around the cab again, damp and insistent. Beyond the glass, the world remained a narrow cylinder of visibility. Mile marker 320 slipped by. The next gantry loomed out of the mist sooner than he anticipated, closer than the usual spacing. Its panel glowed steadily already, no flicker this time. He felt a small, irrational tension in his shoulders, like bracing for a surprise in a story he was suddenly part of. The sign's amber text assembled itself in his view. Service exit 319. Use now. Follow overpass. He frowned outright. There was no service exit 319 on his mental map. The last exit marker had been 314. The next service plaza should have been at 326. He'd memorized the turnpike's rhythm, plazas, exits, rest areas, over many trips. He double-checked the GPS. The small screen showed their current position in abstract lines and soft colors. Ahead, highway uninterrupted. No exit branches for miles. No service ramp at 319. His first instinct was glitch. Signs malfunction sometimes, their messages lagging or referencing closures that had already passed. He once seen one warn of icy bridges in the middle of August. Still, the phrasing rubbed the grain of his experience in a different way. Service exit, follow overpass. The panel didn't look old or damaged. There was no obvious error code in the corner, no nonsense symbols, just those words, glowing calm and firm. He passed beneath, eyes scanning the right-hand side of the road more intently now. For half a minute, nothing changed. Gray ahead, gray to the right, the white line at the shoulder glowing, unbroken. Then, as if sliding in from behind a curtain, a stub of ramp appeared. It rose gently from the shoulder, barely wider than a single lane, its surface slightly rougher than the main lanes. Low concrete barriers flanked it. A small, weathered sign stood at its base, almost swallowed by the fog. His lights washed over it for a heartbeat. Service access. MP 319. Authorized vehicles only. The paint was faded, the corners chipped. Someone had stuck a reflective orange strip over the bottom edge years ago. It glowed dully in his beams. The ramp had not been on his GPS. His foot hovered between throttle and brake. If he continued straight, he would ride through whatever the fog covered at regular highway speed, trusting in his lights and the emptiness. If he took the ramp, he would be stepping off the known path onto something smaller, stranger, unlisted. The next gantry was coming up fast. Its sign flared through the mist. Once more, the amber letters were already in place. Use service exit. Now, Malik. His name sat on the bottom line in the same segmented style as every other letter, no different in color or brightness, but it anchored the message with a personal weight. For a bare second, his rational mind reared. A prank, some bored operator in a control room recognizing his truck ID from the toll reader and playing games. But the idea didn't quite fit around the edges. This level of improvisation, tied to a non-public ramp that his GPS didn't see at 2 a.m. in thick fog, felt like a lot of trouble for a joke no one would ever know about but him. His hands had already flicked on the turn signal before he finished that thought. The indicator clicked softly in the cab. He guided the truck toward the right, across the white line, onto the mouth of the service ramp. The transition from mainline to spur was surprisingly smooth, just a faint change in vibration under the tires as they found older concrete. As soon as he was on it, the sense of having passed through a thin membrane settled over him. The fog did not vanish, but it changed character slightly. It no longer rushed straight at him in a uniform wall. Instead, it curled and folded in softer, slower eddies, as if the air here had been disturbed less often. The ramp climbed in a gentle curve. To his left, through gaps in the murk, Malik caught brief glimpses of the main highway running parallel but slightly lower, a twin ribbon of pale gray, empty, stretching ahead. To his right, the concrete barrier rose to chest height, beyond it only white. The service road leveled and straightened, becoming a narrow overpass that shadowed the mainline from above and to one side. Old cat's eye reflectors, embedded in its center, caught his headlights and sparked in orderly dots, a different kind of guidance, older than the big gantries and digital signs. He glanced in his mirrors. The main highway's lanes below were empty as far as he could see. No headlights, front or back. No red taillights punctured the white ahead. Another structure rose in front of him out of the fog. For a moment he thought it was yet another gantry. Then the shape resolved into something blockier, wider. A series of booths lined across the overpass like small concrete sentries. Above them, a broad canopy stretched, its underside ribbed with beams and old fluorescent fixtures, some dark, some still humming faintly. It was a toll plaza, not one that matched any he knew on this turnpike. Those were bright, modern, with tall glass windows and large lane signs. This one looked older, narrower, its design belonging to an earlier era of highway architecture. The paint on the concrete islands was worn, yellow lines faded almost to gray. The glass in the booths reflected, briefly, his own headlights but revealed nothing inside. As his truck approached, something in the cab beeped. His toll transponder, clipped lightly to the windshield where it could be read by overhead sensors, flashed its tiny green light and chimed once in acknowledgement, as if he had passed beneath a standard gantry on the mainline, as if an invisible reader had noted his presence here as just another data point. He hadn't seen any sensors. He rolled forward, instinct guiding him to the far right lane. Over years, he'd learned that side lanes were often designated for trucks. There were no visible lane markers overhead, no EZ-Pass signs or rate charts posted. Only the greenish pills of old fluorescent tubes buzzing softly under the canopy, their light bleeding into the mist. The booth stood empty, or so they seemed at first. Out of the corner of his eye, as he inched through at a cautious pace, Malik thought he caught a flicker of movement behind one of the windows. A shadow, faint and slow, like someone standing up from a stool. He turned his head instinctively, but by the time his gaze locked onto the booth, there was nothing there. Just the reflection of his own headlights, distended by tiny imperfections in the old glass. He passed the middle booth. A sound reached him then, a slight metallic rattle as though coins had been dropped into a tray somewhere inside, followed by the soft slide of a drawer. The noise was muffled by fog and glass and memory, but it was distinct. His hand stayed firm on the wheel. The truck's engine idled low, almost respectful. For one brief moment, as the nose of his truck aligned with the center of the plaza, he felt another presence around him. Not in any one spot, not a figure he could have pointed to, but a sense of people once being here. Night shift attendants sipping coffee in styrofoam cups, staring out into fog just like this. Control room operators watching rows of camera feeds, hands hovering over keyboards that changed the messages on the big signs. 100 unremarkable, waking lives layered over each other through years of slow traffic. Then he was through. The canopy fell away behind him. The fog opened a little in front, revealing the service road continuing its parallel course above the main line. To his left, the distant smudge of red lights appeared far ahead on the lower highway, blurred and scattered. A cluster rather than a single vehicle, a congregation of brake lamps and hazard flashers. They hovered in the mist like a small, red constellation. The service road kept him separate, holding him up and aside. He drove on, the narrow lane curving gently back toward the main line. As he drew nearer to the point where the two would meet again, he glanced down whenever the fog allowed. The fainter shapes of stopped vehicles suggested themselves. The angled bluntness of a semi's trailer, the compact silhouette of a car on the shoulder, the rotating, smeared glow of what could have been a patrol vehicle's lights attenuated by distance and mist. No details, and no need for them. Just the sense of something that had interrupted the easy flow of the night, gathering everyone in that spot into an unintended pause. His own path bore him past and above. The merge ramp appeared ahead as a soft sweep of pavement angling down from the service road back toward the main lanes. No signs marked it, no arrows painted the way. It simply offered itself, the white lines fresh enough to trust. As he guided the truck onto it, the CB crackled for the first time in a while. "Yeah, they got the right lane shut down past 321, a faint voice said, smeared with static. Pile of fog, couple cars tapped each other. Nothing too ugly, but traffic's all backed up. If you ain't there yet, maybe hold off till they clear it." Another voice murmured agreement, then the channel slipped back to low hiss. Malik merged smoothly into the left lane of the main line, coming in behind a pair of dim taillights that hadn't been there before. The fog seemed lighter here than it had half an hour ago, its density beginning to break. His mirrors filled with the familiar sight of symmetrical red points stretching backward along the curve of the road, a small line of vehicles easing cautiously through the remaining mist. He glanced once into his right mirror, where the cluster of hazard lights still glowed faintly behind him. They shrank with distance, then faded entirely as both fog and curvature took them out of his direct sight. Ahead, another gantry came into view. Its sign was dark at first, then sprang to amber life as he approached. The letters shifted once, then settled. Fog. Slowly lifting. Drive safe. Plain words, impersonal. No names. No directives to leave the road. Just the kind of quiet reassurance someone might murmur as they folded a blanket. Malik drove under it, feeling the strange tautness that had built up between his shoulder blades begin to unwind. The fog around the truck thinned by degrees. Distant shapes grew clearer. A row of lights from a far-off town splashed the clouds near the horizon with a dull orange glow. At the next service plaza, 20 miles on, he decided to pull in. The plaza's entrance ramp curved gently away from the highway, leading him under another sodium glow. The fog here was patchier, drifting in torn sheets between the trees and lampposts. He parked among a scattering of other rigs, their engines idling or ticking as they cooled, breath steaming from stacks like patient animals resting. Inside the plaza's building, it smelled of coffee, fryer oil, and disinfectant, familiar, unremarkable comforts. A few travelers dozed slumped in chairs. A pair of truckers talked quietly near a vending machine, their words indistinct but their laughter real. At the information counter, a map of the turnpike hung on the wall, each exit and plaza marked with neat icons, mile numbers printed in small black text along the line. As he waited for his coffee to be poured, Malik let his gaze drift along it, finger following the route he'd just taken. Exit 314, Plaza 326, a couple of intermediate ramps for local access. No service exit 319. Need something? The attendant asked, noticing his focus. Just looking, Malik replied. That's service ramp between 318 and 320, the one up on the overpass. You know how long that's been open. The attendant, a woman with reading glasses perched low on her nose, glanced at the map and frowned faintly. Service ramp. Yeah, he said slowly. Little sign said Service Access MP 319. Ran parallel up over the main line, through an old toll plaza. Thought it was odd I hadn't seen it before. She took off her glasses, leaned closer to the map, then shook her head. There's no toll plaza there. Closest we had was the old central booths at 300, but those were shut down years back when they switched everything over to electronic. Got torn out far as I know. He hesitated. Maybe an old maintenance road. Could be. She gave a small, non-committal shrug, as if she'd heard odder things from drivers at 3 in the morning. They used to have all kinds of cut-throughs and staff ramps when they were building and fixing this place. Most of them got closed off. Folks still talk about a ghost booth somewhere between 318 and 322, but that's just late shift talk. She smiled slightly as though at a private joke. You know how it is. Long nights, too much coffee. He nodded, accepting his cup. Back in his cab, with the engine idling low and the fog curling lazily beyond the glass, Malik pulled out his phone and opened the Turnpike Authority's app. The toll statement for his transponder hadn't fully updated. Earlier charges still waited in a list. One entry, though, had already appeared. 3:22 a.m. Plaza Central Control, Class 8 toll, $0. He stared at it for a long moment. The designation was unlike the others, which all listed named plazas and standard gantries. Control made him think of rooms full of monitors, of operators watching feed from cameras mounted on gantries in fog like this. He could imagine them now, decades ago or maybe just last winter, sitting in some hidden building marked Authorized Personnel Only, hands on switches that set messages across miles of highway, warning drivers about fog, closures, accidents, watching dots of light creep across their screens and trying to keep them from colliding. He set the phone aside. Outside, the fog continued its slow retreat, lifting in tatters from the road. Gantries still spanned the lanes, patient and silent, their panels dark for now, waiting for the next reason to speak. When Malik pulled back onto the turnpike an hour later, the sky ahead had begun to pale at its very edge, a thin promise of dawn. The signs overhead were blank rectangles against the paling gray, their amber letters resting just behind the surface, unread but ready. As his truck rolled beneath them, the sensors noted his presence. The toll system logged his passage, and somewhere in the circuitry of the highway, a memory settled, a record of one driver who had listened when the signs spoke more plainly than usual, when the fog hung heavy and the road, in its own quiet way, tried to move him safely past a chapter it did not wish to repeat. Story number 5. The way station sat in a low pocket beside the highway, half sunk in fog like it had been gently placed there and forgotten by the world. Even on clear days, it was the kind of place drivers passed without much thought. A squat brick building, a steel-framed canopy stretching out over wide lanes, a tall sign that by day flashed open or closed in hard red letters. But that night, there was no day to compare it to. There was only the moist, muffled dark and the soft glow of lamps swimming in gray. Theo had been watching the roadside signs tick past for miles. Fog area ahead, use caution. All trucks weigh station 5 miles. All trucks weigh station 1 mile. His rig hummed along the southbound interstate at a careful 50, tires whispering over damp asphalt. The fog had rolled in from the low, swampy land to the east and west sometime after midnight, rising off stagnant pools and black, slow-moving creeks. It clung to the pines that stood in thin ranks along the highway, wrapping their trunks in ghostly scarves. It blurred the orange glow of the occasional gas station sign into smudges of light that seemed to hang in midair without any context. Inside the cab, Theo sat in that quiet, steady focus only late-night drivers seemed to know. His hands rested lightly on the wheel. The dashboard glowed a soft, constant green. The heater blew warm air at his boots. A half-finished sandwich lay wrapped in paper on the passenger seat, forgotten for the moment. The CB was on, volume turned low. A country ballad played from the stereo, the singer's voice thin and lonely, blending with the engine's drone. Now and then a faint voice crackled in on the 19, then dissolved, too far away to bother with. Most other trucks had peeled off at the last large truck stop. He'd seen their lights cluster there in the distance. He had chosen to keep rolling, chasing a few more miles before he would allow his body to fold into the sleeper and sleep. Up ahead, a small green sign emerged from the gray. Way station 1-2 mile. Below it, another. Prepare to stop when flashing. Theo glanced up through the windshield at the overhead gantry that usually hosted the flashing lights. Its outline appeared a moment later, a horizontal bar spanning the highway. 2 yellow lights sat there like eyes. They were already blinking. Figures, he muttered softly, more to the dashboard than to anyone. Some states loved their way stations even in the dead hours. Others let them sleep. He settled his jaw, checked his gauges out of habit. Weight, legal. Axles, spread fine. Logbook, clean. The trailer rode steady behind him, full but not heavy. A load of palletized paper goods that rustled softly only when the road bucked. He took the right lane as the next sign instructed. Trucks, right lane, prepare to exit. The fog thickened in little pulses as he passed low spots, spilling across the shoulder and the grassy median, then thinning again just enough to show the faint glow of the next sign. Way station, open. The word open shimmered in hard, insistent red on a tall post at the beginning of the ramp. Beyond it, through the shifting curtain of mist, he could just make out the rectangular bulk of the way station building, its windows squares of pale yellow light. A line of overhead lamps ran along the canopy above the scales, their halos smeared into glowing wineglass shapes in the damp air. Theo signaled and eased onto the exit ramp, tires thumping gently over the rumble strip. The transition from highway to service road felt like stepping into a slightly different room of the same house. The pavement sounded a little different under the tires, older maybe, with faint seams where patching had been done. The fog moved differently here, too, tugged by the subtle drafts created by the solid shapes of building and barrier. The main interstate slid away to his left, swallowed by whiteness. For the moment, this small square of infrastructure was his entire world. He rolled slowly under the first lamp, its sodium light washing the front of his truck in a mellow orange. The steel beams of the canopy rose over him like a low ceiling. Ahead, the way station's building squatted at the far side of the lanes, brick walls damp and dark, its windows aglow. A panel of glass looked out toward him from what should have been a control room, but the reflection of his own headlights made it impossible to see in. A digital scale readout mounted on a pole faced the lane. Its red numbers currently showed 0, the decimal point throbbing faintly like a waiting heartbeat. He slowed to a crawl until the wide white line on the pavement matched up with the hood marker he used as a guide. The truck eased forward that last foot until he felt the faintest suggestion of weight shift, the sensation of the drive axles settling onto the plates. The red digits jumped. 78,420. They stayed there steady and unflustered, good weight within limits. Theo waited. Usually there be a voice on the intercom by now, or a sign illuminated ordering him to pull around back for inspection. Instead, there was only the purr of his engine, the soft ticking of the defroster fan, and the faint patter of condensed fog dripping off the canopy beams onto the concrete around him. He flicked his eyes toward the window of the control room again. Behind the glare of his own lights, he could just barely make out the ghost of an interior. A desk, a computer monitor, a stool, a bulletin board with papers pinned crookedly. But no person materialized, no silhouette moved. The CB crackled to life. Suddenly, loud in the quiet. "You stuck on the scales there, southbound." Theo startled slightly, then reached for the mic, thumb finding the button. "Yeah, sitting on one right now. Station's open, but nobody's talking." "Copy that," the voice returned, faint but clear. A male voice, older, carrying the easy cadence of someone who'd been working nights longer than most. "Sit tight a breath. Fog's playing games with the cameras." Theo glanced at the speaker set into a weathered post near his window. Its metal grill glistened with moisture. No light glowed behind it. The voice hadn't come from there. It had come from his CB. He looked up at the dark window again. "You dot?" he asked into the mic, a faint, dry humor edging the words. "Thought you guys stuck to your own radios." "We use what works," the man answered. "Fog's thick as stew out there tonight. Lens heaters can't keep up. You're looking at 78 and some change on my board. What ray you showing on that little pole in front of you?" Theo glanced at the digital readout. The numbers held their steady scarlet. 78,420. 78,420, he reported. "That's us then." A pause, the sound of papers shuffling faintly in the background. "Company." Theo gave the name. He could hear keys clicking somewhere far away as the man entered it. The fog swirled outside the cab, brushing soft, damp fingers against the glass. Droplets traced slow paths down the side window. "You run this stretch regular?" the voice asked after a moment. "Couple times a month," Theo replied. "Usually hit this station in the daytime, though. You all don't keep late hours, far as I knew. Thought you shut down after 10. "We do most nights," the man said. "Tonight's a bit of an exception." He hesitated, then added, almost lightly, "Fog advisories lit up half the district. Boss got skittish. Decided we ought to keep an eye on the heavy folks for a while. Make sure nobody's running light up front." The explanation fit well enough to rest on. Theo let it settle. "Well, you got me. Full set of paper towels back there," he said, nodding toward the trailer. "Nothing exciting." "Nothing exciting is the goal." Another faint rustle of paper. "Log looks clean from what I can see. Just a sec." Theo's gaze drifted to the edge of the canopy, where the fog boiled and rolled, never quite spilling in all the way. Beyond that dim circle of orange, the world was pure white and darkness layered over each other, the lines between them blurred. He became aware, gradually, of how alone he was. No other trucks idled behind him, waiting their turn on the scale. No cars swept past on the nearby highway, their light spilling briefly through. Even the night insects that usually threw themselves at the fluorescent tubes seemed absent, as if the fog had convinced them that morning would never come and they might as well rest. "Where you headed?" the way station voice asked. "South Depot near the bay," Theo answered. "Another 100 and change." "Might be a slow 100, the man replied softly. "Just had word come through. Wreck about 15 miles down. Fog and speed got together like they always do." His tone held no relish, only a tired familiarity. They're working it, but it's gummed up both lanes off and on. You running on a hard clock tonight, or you got breathing room? Theo frowned. Got some room. Drop windows wide. Didn't see anything about a wreck on the warnings back there. Just happened, the man said. Fog likes to wait till everyone thinks they remember how it works, then remind them they don't. Another brief pause. You could press on and hope to thread the gap, but you'll be running up on brake lights without much horizon. There's a county relief area about 8 miles ahead on the old bypass. Not much more than a wide pull-off and a picnic table nobody sat at in a decade, but it's out of the main mess. You interested? Theo considered. He thought about the creeping fatigue in his shoulders, the way the letters on his GPS display had begun to blur at the edges when he glanced at them. He thought about a line of taillights suddenly appearing in his fog-bound windshield, the accordion ripple of panic as vehicles slowed harder than they meant to. Where's the turn? He asked. Used to be exit 142 before they renumbered everything, the man answered promptly, as if reciting from an old, familiar script. Sign'll say County Route 7, Old Bay Road. You'll climb a little hill, then it'll split. Stay right for the bypass. Mile marker 137 LL sneak up on you just after. Relief area's half a mile past that on the left. Tiny sign. Easy to miss in clear weather. Harder to miss when I tell you about it first. Theo's mental map unspooled, overlaying the hazy green of his GPS route with the voice's older names. He didn't remember a relief area there, but then he'd always flown through that stretch at highway speed on clear days, eyes more on the clock than on lonely picnic tables. You sure it's open? He asked. Last thing I need is to pull into some barricaded patch of asphalt and have to back blind onto a foggy ramp. A small chuckle threaded through the speaker. No barricades. Gravel's rough, paint's half gone, but it's there. County never officially closed it, just forgot to remember it. Fog likes forgotten places. Safer to let it have that one than the main line. He let the words hang. The logic in its own way was sound. Theo nodded to himself. All right, he said. I'll take your old bypass, you signing me off. You're good to go, the man replied. 78 and change, paperwork clean, log clean. When you roll back out, ease it gentle. Concrete can get slick under these lamps. And Theo. He hadn't given his name. He felt a small, cold thumb press gently at the base of his neck. The clock on the dash ticked over from 2:13 to 2:14. Yeah, he said quietly into the mic. Don't chase any lights tonight, the voice said. Not the flashing ones, not the ones that look like they're waving you on, not the ones that look like they're turned backward. Just follow the paint and the numbers. You'll be all right. A faint click signaled the end of the transmission. Theo hesitated another heartbeat, then let his foot out on the clutch, rolled off the scale. As his truck eased forward, the red digits on the readout pole dropped back to 0, the decimal point pulsing its small, waiting pulse. The canopy lights hissed softly overhead. The fog pressed, inquisitive at the edges of the station's circle of illumination. He pulled past the building's front windows. For a moment, his side window lined up exactly with the control room glass. The interior lit itself in a quick impression. A desk with a metal edge worn smooth by elbows. A faded poster on the wall showing a younger version of the way station with trucks queued neatly. A coat hanging from a hook. A white ceramic mug sitting by a keyboard. No one sat at the desk. No one stood in the room at all. He rolled by in a slow, steady glide. The door to the building, recessed a little from the window, had a small notice tacked at eye level. Theo caught only 2 words in the brief wash of his headlights. Station closed. The rest was too small, too blurred by moisture. He frowned, but the ramp was angling him back toward the highway already. The fog swallowed the brick and glass as soon as it could, reclaiming the way station like it was folding it back into its sleeve. When he reached the merge point, he checked his mirrors again. The main lanes looked empty. No new headlights had appeared. The CB was quiet. The patch of light where the way station had been was now just a dull glow, indistinct behind the white. He turned the rig south once more, seeking the faint ghost of the center line with his eyes. The next few miles moved past in that slow, elastic way fog produced. Signs materialized and dripped away. Mile marker 140, then 139. Somewhere beyond the curtain, a low flyover bridge suggested itself and then was gone. Pine trunks leaned close and then receded. He watched for the exit. When the elevated sign finally appeared, its green face and white letters swimming out of the gray, he felt a small stake of relief. County Route 7, Old Bay Road. The ramp curled off gently to the right, slightly steeper than the main line, its guardrail beaded with water. He took it carefully, trailer following with a subdued sway. Fog pursued him down the ramp, but something about its texture felt different here. Looser around the edges, as if the main bulk of it was content to stay draped over the interstate proper. The road under his tires narrowed, the smooth rumble of high-speed lanes giving way to a less perfect surface, with small irregularities and patches of coarser gravel. The bypass forked at the top of a small hill, just as the man had said. A sign, almost invisible until he was nearly on top of it, pointed left toward a town he couldn't see. The right-hand lane continued forward, unsigned except for an old bent marker with a county road number half worn away. He stayed right. Old Bay Road. It ran roughly parallel to the interstate, separated from it by a thin strip of dark trees and shallow marsh. Through the trunks, he could occasionally glimpse the pale glow of the highway's lamps, muted and far away. The fog over there looked denser, a heavy band stretched low over the lanes. Here, it moved in pockets, leaving small, clear stretches where he could see 20 lengths of his trailer ahead, then pulling in again with soft insistence. Mile marker 137 appeared, its green face dulled by a thin film of moisture. A small brown sign followed it, nearly swallowed by a stand of scrub. Roadside relief, 1-2 mile. Theo felt an odd quiet settle over him then, a hush that was not just the absence of sound but the presence of something waiting. The road curved gently, dipping slightly as it tracked the subtle lay of the land. The relief area sign, when it arrived, was more suggestion than statement. A simple brown board with white letters, leaning a little, its post wrapped with old reflective tape. An arrow pointed left into the fog. He turned. The entrance was narrow, cracked at the edges where grass and weeds had crept in over the years. The asphalt bore the faint ghost of painted lines, now more memory than marking. A single lamppost stood near the center, its dome-shaped light sputtering a soft, determined yellow. He rolled the truck into the lot and parked along the far edge, nose pointed back toward the exit. Old habits. The gravel and broken asphalt crunched faintly under his tires as he straightened out. He set the brakes with a gentle hiss. The engine's rumble dulled, then ceased as he turned the key. Silence ballooned into the cab. Outside, the fog moved lazily through the trees, wrapping the solitary lamppost in a thick collar. The light gave the impression of a small, private universe bounded by white. Beyond it, nothing was visible at all. A wooden picnic table sat off to one side, its surface dark with moisture. One bench slanted where a leg had sunk into soft earth. A trash barrel leaned, its lid askew. Theo sat for a moment, hands resting on his thighs, listening. The tick of cooling metal echoed faintly from the engine compartment. The refrigeration unit at the front of the trailer hummed on, a soft and steady heartbeat. Beyond that, there was almost nothing. No distant rush of highway, no chorus of insects, no far-off train horn. Just the heavy, damp quiet of fog and pines. He checked the dash clock, 2:36 a.m. He told himself he'd rest his eyes for a few minutes. Long enough for whatever knot of traffic lay on the interstate to unknot, for whatever responders were weaving red and blue through the fog to untangle metal and rubber. Long enough for his shoulders to soften, for his mind to stretch and settle. He climbed into the sleeper, left his boots just inside the curtain line, and lay down on the narrow bed. The pillow was cool, the blanket faintly smelling of detergent and his own weary body. He left the truck's small interior light off. The lamppost's glow seeped in along the edges of the curtain like a diluted dawn. The fog made time soft. It was hard to say how long he slept. No dreams pressed themselves into his memory. It was more like sinking into a deep, neutral pool, and then rising again to the surface when some quiet part of him decided it was time. He blinked in the half-dark of the cab. The first thing he noticed was that the lamppost's glow had shifted color, from sodium orange to something paler, softer, like the beginning of real morning. The second was that the truck felt very still, as if even the refrigeration unit had paused to listen. Theo checked the clock. 3:04 a.m. He hadn't meant to sleep that long, but his body felt grateful for it, his thoughts clearer. He swung his legs down, pulled his boots back on, and pushed the curtain aside. The fog outside had thinned, but only a little. The lamppost's light now had to compete with the faint gray of an almost day in the sky. Together, they painted the parking area in washed-out tones. The trees were more distinct now, dark fingers reaching up, their tops still lost. The picnic table stood as it had. The trash barrel's lid was still crooked. Something else had changed, though. Across the lot, in the near distance, another truck had taken up a spot. It was backed in along the opposite edge, nose pointed away, as if it had materialized while he slept. Its outline was clear enough now in the thin fog, a long-hooded tractor, the kind that had been popular 2 or 3 generations back, with big round headlights and side mirrors that perched like proud ears. Its trailer was a shorter box unit, the kind used before everything stretched out to maximize capacity. The paint job, even through the veil, looked out of time. Faded teal on the cab, white on the trailer, a broad stripe of darker blue running along its side. Old lettering, peeling but still legible, read, State Line Express. Theo frowned, more in curiosity than unease. He hadn't heard another vehicle arrive. No crunch of gravel, no engine note. But fog ate sound the way it ate light, and a sleeping mind heard only what it wanted. As he watched, the door on the far side of the teal cab opened. A figure climbed down, man-shaped, in coveralls or a jacket, a cap pulled low. The fog-muffled details turned the person into a silhouette. But Theo caught the movement of a stretch, arms up, back arched, the universal language of someone who'd just woken from a cab nap. The man, if man he was, turned briefly toward the lamppost. Theo thought for a moment that he might lift a hand in greeting. Instead, the figure simply stood there for a breath, looking out toward the faint glow that suggested the interstate in the distance. Then, as Theo blinked, the fog thickened in a passing wave. The lot blurred, the lamppost, cone of light smeared. The teal truck's outline wavered, its edges fraying like chalk lines washed with a damp cloth. When the air cleared a few seconds later, the space where the old rig had been was empty. No tire tracks disturbed the damp gravel where its wheels had stood. No puff of exhaust hung lingering in the air. Only the impression of its existence remained, like a picture that had been removed from a wall but left its lighter rectangle behind. Theo sat very still. The refrigeration unit kicked back on with a soft chuck and hum, startling him slightly. The ordinary world rushed back in, the feel of the steering wheel under his hand, the faint smell of old coffee in his thermos, the weight of his phone in his pocket. He climbed down from the cab, boots landing on the cold, gritty surface of the lot. The fog beaded on his jacket in tiny droplets. He walked slowly toward the center, toward the picnic table, scanning for any sign that another vehicle had been here. A stray footprint, a dropped wrapper, a scuff. The ground told little. The moisture had made everything uniformly dark. Maybe there was a faint difference in the gravel where weight might have rested, but it could just as easily have been the way his own headlights had dried it the night before. He stood for a moment, listening. Far away, the dull whisper of highway traffic had returned, thin but present now that the fog was loosening its grip. A bird called once in the trees, hesitant. The lamppost gave a tiny electric buzz. On the tabletop, etched faintly into the worn, damp wood, close to where his hand rested, someone had carved a name years ago with a knife point or a nail. WALT. Next to it in the same rough, blocky hand, a short phrase. Stay off 15 when she's white. Theo stared at the letters for a long beat. The distant hiss of tires on wet asphalt grew a little louder as more of the fog released the sound. Bypass he was on had no number 15, but 15 was the designation of the interstate he'd left a half hour before. He let his fingers trace the grooves lightly. The carving was old, edges smoothed by seasons of rain and sun. There was no way to know when it had been done, or whether Walt had been talking about the same finicky, dangerous fog that now thinned around Theo's parked rig. He walked back to the truck, climbed in, and shut the door behind him. The cab reasserted its small, warm reality. He started the engine. The harmonic vibrations settled into him like an old song. Before pulling out, he reached for the CB. "Anybody southbound past 150 on 15?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. "How's it look out there?" Static answered at first. Then a voice came through, clearer than before, only slightly distorted by distance. "Southbound at 149, the driver said. "Got one lane still blocked. Troopers running traffic through slow, round a fender bender that got bigger. Fog's trying to hang on, but she's lossin'. If you're coming down from the north, wouldn't hurt to hang back till they clear. Seen 3 cars try to nose up on the tail of a wrecker like it was gonna tow M through quicker." Theo nodded to himself, though the other driver couldn't see. "Copy that. I'm on the old bypass. Gonna ride it a little longer and sneak back in below the mess." "Smart man," the voice replied. "Old bypass is a good friend on nights like this. Watch out for deer and ghosts." A soft chuckle. "Heard tell of an old waymaster and a long-nosed Pete still wanderin' these parts." Theo's hand tightened just fractionally on the mic. "That right?" "Oh yeah," the driver continued, amusement balancing with something softer. "Story goes back before they automated the main station. There was a night about like this, fog thick enough to chew. Big pileup on 15. Waymaster sat up in his little brick castle and watched it all on grainy cameras. Felt useless as a wet match. After that, they say, he got real funny about fog. Kept pulling folks off early, sending them down the old road if he thought the mainline was getting ideas. Retired about 10 years ago. Station closed not long after. But some folks," another chuckle, "some folks say if you roll onto the scales in a real thick whiteout, you'll still hear him on the line, telling you where to hide till the road settles." Static rose, then fell again. Theo glanced at the dash clock. 3:09 a.m. His memory offered up the image of the way station's front door notice, blurred but there. The word station closed, catching his headlights. The empty room with its mug by the keyboard. The voice on the CB using his name without asking. He cleared his throat softly. Seems like he was right to be funny about fog. "Ain't that the truth?" the other driver said. "Anyhow, you be safe out there. I'm about to be off this circus. Home's 2 exits away." "Safe home," Theo said. He put the mic back in its clip, eased the truck into gear, and rolled slowly out of the relief area. The narrow entrance ramp slid back under his wheels. Then the old bypass welcomed him again, its pavement familiar now, its curves gentle. When he rejoined the interstate, a few miles further south, the sky had brightened palpably. The fog clung stubbornly in patches over the marshes and low lines, but above the road itself, it was losing its grip. The lanes shone dull and wet but unobstructed. Whatever tangle of metal and headlights had blocked the path earlier had been mostly untied. Only a couple of tow trucks remained on the shoulder, their beacons now more precaution than alarm. He passed the scene at a modest speed, eyes scanning. There were no injuries visible, no chaos, just the quiet aftermath of trouble. A car with a crumpled fender, a truck with a bent bumper, two troopers talking in low voices. The air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and something metallic, not sharp, just present. Theo's gaze flicked once to his right mirror. For a heartbeat, as the highway bent and his view of the shoulder slid away, he thought he saw a brick structure standing back from the lanes, half veiled by the last shreds of fog. A canopy, a window catching light, the impression of a man in a cap standing at the glass, hand resting on a mug. Then the curve took it out of sight. The next time he passed that way, a week later in mid-afternoon on a clear day, the way station stood small and unassuming beside the road. Its brick walls were more weathered than he remembered. Ivy climbed one corner. The front door was padlocked, a proper metal sign bolted to it. State Way facility closed. Use main complex AT exit 120. The canopy over the scale looked a little tired, streaked with old rust. He rolled past in the free-flowing traffic stream. No yellow lights blinking, no compulsion to turn. But every time after that, whenever the fog rose from the lowlands and the signs ahead whispered of reduced visibility, Theo kept a small part of his attention tuned to the edges of the road, to side ramps, to forgotten turnoffs, to the subtle guidance that sometimes came not from official bulletins, but from voices that treated the highway as something with a memory and a will. Sometimes late in the year, when the air turned heavy and white and the night grew still, trucks would still find their way to the old relief area off the bypass. They'd park under the lone lamppost and listen to the soft tick of cooling engines, to the damp rustle of fog in the trees. If they looked closely at the picnic table by that fading light, they'd see other names carved alongside Walt's now, some new, some old, all part of the quiet record drivers left behind. And once in a while, if the fog was just right and the world had drawn itself small, a driver sitting on the scales at a shuttered station might hear a voice crackle in on a line it had no business traveling, offering directions to a safer patch of asphalt and a little time to let trouble untangle itself without them. Story number 6. The coastal highway didn't cross the water in one bold leap. It stepped out carefully, span by span, low concrete bridges stretching between small artificial islands and marshy shoals. In the daytime, the causeway looked almost delicate from afar, a stitched line just above the glittering surface, with white guardrails and lean light poles tracing its length. At night, especially in fog, it felt less like a road and more like a hallway between worlds. Cass had always liked this stretch. She knew it well enough now to feel the timing in her bones. The long inland approach flanked by scrub pine and billboards, the lift onto the first span where the air suddenly turned cool and salted, the subtle hum change under her tires as rubber met concrete instead of asphalt. On clear nights, she could see cargo ships anchored offshore like patient, floating cities in the distant winking lights of the harbor cranes. On fog nights, the rest of the world just quietly fell away. Tonight, the rest of the world had fallen away early. The inland fog had thickened miles before she even reached the bay. It pooled in the low ditches, hunched between the trees, turned storefronts and gas stations into vague, glowing smudges. By the time Cass pulled out of the last truck stop and eased her rig down the on-ramp, the landscape beyond the guardrails had become an uncomplicated shade of gray. Inside the cab, everything was warm and sharply defined. The dashboard lights breathed steady green and amber over her hands. The heater sighed across her boots. The faint hum of the reefer unit behind her mingled with the deeper growl of the engine, both vibrations settling into the frame of the truck like a low, constant purr. The clock in the console read 2:18 a.m. She'd fueled up, grabbed coffee, checked the forecast on her phone. Dense fog over Bay Bridge, the alert had said earlier in the evening, as if the fog could be anywhere else on a night like this. Speeds reduced. Use caution. She shrugged, not because she took it lightly, but because you couldn't postpone every trip for whether the coast considered ordinary. A green overhead sign swam into view through the mist. OCENWAY Causeway, next right, trucks OK. Below it, in smaller letters, radio advisory 5:30 a.m. when flashing. Cass lifted her eyes to the small panel mounted on the gantry ahead. Two yellow lights, one on either side of a tiny radio symbol, blinked in slow alternation. She flipped her turn signal, merging toward the exit, then reached with her free hand to twist the dial on the dash radio down to the low end. Static rustled, then thinned. The numbers on the digital display clicked past until they reached 530. Coastal Highway Authority Advisory, a calm voice was saying, already in progress. Dense fog over the causeway, visibility in places less than 100 feet. All drivers are urged to reduce speed to 45 miles per hour and increase following distance. Hazard lights should not be used while moving. Maintain lane discipline. Do not stop on the spans unless directed. The voice sounded male, middle-aged, almost conversational. Not the flattened tone of an automated tape, but someone actually sitting at a mic somewhere. Live in the small hours. Cass eased her speed down to 45 before the bridge even began. The road rose in a gentle ramp. As her truck climbed, the air shifted, inland damp giving way to the sharper, mineral note of salt and tidal mud. The fog seemed to brighten as it thinned from its heavy inland density into a lighter, more luminous marine layer. Her headlights hit it and came back in soft, pearly reflections. At the top of the incline, the world dropped away on either side. Low concrete barriers flanked the causeway. Beyond them, water vanished into whiteness, the dark surface hidden beneath a blanket of pale gray. Streetlights on tall poles ran down the median, each one casting a round pool of hazed yellow that barely overlapped with the next. Between those soft islands of light, the road dipped into dimmer pockets that felt, for a heartbeat, like being between breaths. The inland trees were gone now. The only structures remaining were the lights, the guardrails, the occasional emergency phone box standing mute at the edge. The low drone of the engine and the whisper of tires on concrete became the loudest sounds. Current conditions, the radio voice continued. Wind calm, air temperature 49 degrees. Fog expected to persist until after sunrise. Oceanway Causeway remains open in both directions, but we remind all motorists of the 1987 multi-vehicle collision on Span 5. Please do not try to outrun limited visibility. Trust your speedometer, not your instincts. Cass knew the story in outline. An old chain reaction crash before they'd installed the modern advisory system. Every driver on this route did. In the photographs that sometimes surfaced in anniversary articles, the bridge had looked like a cluttered shelf of metal in the fog, bumpers and fenders kissing where they shouldn't. No gore, just chaos and too many people in one place where the road had wanted them to be spread out. She'd driven more winters than she cared to count. Black ice, whiteout, sideways rain, each demanded its own habits. For fog, the rule that had saved her more than once was simple. Don't believe anything your eyes tell you beyond the reach of your low beams. The brain loved to invent shapes in the white. The road rarely agreed. She set her cruise at 42, lower than advised, and let the truck settle into its rolling rhythm. Mile marker 3 on the causeway appeared on the right shoulder, a slim green post beaded with moisture. The number glistened briefly, then slipped into the rear view. Cass knew that the causeway from Inland Foot to Island Port ran about 16 miles. On clear nights, it was an easy quarter hour. Tonight, it would be longer. That was fine. The fish in her trailer wouldn't protest. The cold would hold. The advisory continued. If you must stop, the voice said, use only the signed emergency pullouts located at the ends of each span. Under no circumstances stop on the open bridge. Do not attempt U-turns. Marine fog may conceal oncoming traffic until it is too late to react. The way he said marine fog made it sound like a living thing. A low, distant sound rolled in from the right. the mournful moan of a foghorn somewhere on a buoy or breakwater. It rose, hung in the air, then slipped away. Cass felt it in her chest more than in her ears. She drove through another pool of lamplight, another patch of denser white. Up ahead, the ghostly outline of another overhead sign gantry in the mist marked the division between spans. As she approached, faint letters on its panel began to glow, amber through gray. RDOCD visibility. Span 2. Maintain 2-car gap. She snorted softly at that. 2-car gap meant nothing to a 70-foot combination rig. Still, the intention was there. Don't ride anyone's bumper. She hadn't seen a bumper in 15 minutes. The panel passed overhead. The reflective numbers on the next marker told her 5. On the radio, the advisory voice dipped into a different cadence. For those passengers waiting at Harbor Ferry, it said, please be advised that crossings are suspended until further notice due to zero-vis conditions in the channel. Remain in your vehicles. Do not abandon the queue. Headlights on low beam only. Keep your radios tuned here for further instructions. Cass's brow furrowed. Harbor Ferry. There hadn't been a ferry on this bay in decades. The causeway and its spans had rendered it obsolete long before she'd ever seen the coast. The old pilings still stood in places near the port side, a line of blackened, decaying posts marching into the water like ankle-deep tree stumps, but no boat had docked there since the bridge's grand opening. She remembered the article headline, "From ferry lines to free flow, Oceanway Causeway completes coastal link." She reached toward the dash to check the station indicator. 5:30 a.m. glowed at steady digits. The signal was strong. No crackle, no warble, no static that would suggest she'd slipped onto some faint ghost of another broadcast. "Remain with your vehicles," the voice repeated. "Do not leave the roadway. Harbor staff will make rounds to check on you." For a moment, she wondered if this was some sort of commemorative rebroadcast, an old advisory track looped with modern ones in some engineer's idea of a warning. A reminder of how bad fog could get, perhaps. But there was nothing in the tone that hinted at nostalgia. It sounded like someone, right now, really expected drivers to be sitting in a line for a boat that no longer ran. Outside, the fog moved in slow, complex eddies. It swirled as her truck displaced the air, curling around the cab and trailer. In the far corner of her vision, something else moved as well, a dim, low cluster of lights off to the right, hovering at the edge of what her beams could touch. She glanced, careful not to overcommit her attention. Below and to the side, beyond the barrier, the faint, smeared glow of taillights flickered through the mist. They sat lower than her truck, in a compressed bunch like beads on a loose strand. Some glowed steadily red, others brightened and dimmed as if small feet feathered petals. Between them, she thought she saw the pale smudges of license plates, the soft gleam of chrome bumpers from a time when bumpers had been made of chrome at all. It looked like a line of cars waiting on a ramp, but there should have been only water beneath her wheels for at least half a mile in that direction. The fog thickened there, and the small cluster dimmed and faded, like lights seen through a curtain pulled slowly across. Cass turned her eyes back to the road ahead. Her hands stayed steady. The engine droned on. "Mile 10, she murmured to herself, when the marker finally appeared, though her mind still kept separate count of spans and overhead signs. The causeway's support islands were small, divided by channels and tidal flats. The modern design kept the road almost entirely above the water, with only a few low shoulders at the span joints where emergency pullouts gave drivers a little refuge if they needed it. One of those pullouts appeared now on her left, a wideness in the concrete, marked by a sign that said emergency stop area only. It yawned briefly out of the fog, then slid away behind her trailers like a missed opportunity. Empty. The advisory changed again without fanfare. "For motorists on span 5, the voice said, do not attempt to change lanes. Remain in position. Repeat, remain in position. Emergency personnel are en route to the front of the queue. Cass's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Span 5 was still ahead of her. The sign she just passed had marked the end of Span 3. The road was a single ribbon. There was nowhere for a queue to form except in memory. She checked the CB, turned the volume up a notch. "Anyone eastbound on the causeway?" she asked, her own voice sounding oddly small in the soft, damp space of the cab. "What's your visibility like?" Only static met her, washed through with occasional faint crackles that might have been other drivers on the mainland side, too distant or masked by the fog. No one answered. On 530, the advisory continued without acknowledging the silence. "If you are at or near the head of the line," the voice said, "do not exit your vehicle to investigate at this time. Conditions ahead remain unstable. Stay with your car. Help is on the way." A memory stirred. Articles she'd read, drivers' tailies swapped in diners, about that 1987 pileup, about how, in the early confusion, some had gotten out to check on others, their silhouettes lost in the silver, barely seen before other cars slid into the wreck, about the emergency broadcast that had gone out over 530, telling everyone on the bridge to stay put, to stop moving, to stop adding motion to a problem already in motion. Her truck rolled past the Span 4 marker. The causeway narrowed a fraction here, the concrete shoulders crowding closer. The fog seemed to lean in with them, closing the world down to the painted lane lines and the rumble strip on the left. Far below, water moved. Though no waves were visible, she could feel the faint, irregular push of wind through the steering wheel and the occasional whiff of wilder sea, that briny tang beneath the more stagnant mudflats. Up ahead, another sign gantry coalesced through the fog. The panel this time was dark at first. Then, as she came within what felt like touching distance of its base, amber letters blinked on. Fog Span 5. Do not stop. Trucks keep 2-lane WIDTHS. The last line made no sense on this 2-lane stretch. There was no second lane for her. She watched the words pulse for a moment, text slightly blurred by the dampness in the air. Then, in the instant before she passed directly beneath, the letters flickered, rearranged themselves into something else, as if a hand had brushed a different pattern across a board of lights. SBN 5Q length. 40 vehicles. Hold position. SBN 5Q length. Q length. 40 vehicles. She drew a breath that tasted like cold metal and coffee, then let it out slowly. The fog brightened slightly just ahead, a sign always that something was different. Light bouncing off another surface. She eased off the cruise control, let the truck's speed drop a mile or two per hour. At first she thought it was a trick of the lamps, their halos overlapping, making a patch that seemed lit more than the rest. Then the shapes within that brightness grew more defined. A line of vehicles lay in front of her. Not 10 yards, not 20, but many, their tail ends fatting into the mist as if into another dimension. Their taillights glowed softly red, some round, some rectangular, some high, some low. The nearest looked to be an old sedan from somewhere around the 70s, boxy, with chrome around the trunk lid. Next, a pickup truck with a two-tone paint job. In the fog, their colors were muted and guessed at, faded blue, dark green, tan. They sat perfectly still. No exhaust plumed from their pipes. No headlights shone forward, only the rear lamps lit, bleeding color onto the slick concrete. Cass's foot moved to the brake with the lightest of touches. She slowed until the space between her truck and the last car in line was generous and unmoving. Hazard lights would only make more noise in the white. She left them off. The truck idled down, its rumble a low, patient sound. On the radio, the advisory voice softened. Span 5Q is holding, it said. Do not attempt to back up. Do not attempt to turn around. Roll your windows down a crack for fresh air. Keep radios on low. Check in on your passengers. Talk to each other if you can do so safely. We know you've been there a while. Time moved strangely. Cass watched the nearest taillights. No figure opened a car door. No silhouette shifted behind a window. The fog softened edges, but she could still make out curves of fenders, the low hump of a station wagon roofline 2 cars up. A big rig was there, 15 or 20 vehicles ahead, shorter than hers, an older model with twin round lamps on the rear of its trailer. The queue did not belong to this hour, or perhaps to any single hour at all. It seemed layered, an impression of waiting pressed into the concrete the way grooves were pressed into the barrier by years of wind and spray. She glanced in her side mirror. Behind her, the causeway remained empty. No headlights crept up. No one rode her bumper, urging her on. Just her own trailer lights reflecting faintly off the guardrail and vanishing into fog. Her radio hissed, then the advisory voice added, "If you can hear this and you're near the middle of the line, know that responders have reached both ends. You are not alone on the span." Cass felt that line land somewhere deep, like a stone dropped into a still pool. She reached for the CB again, not out of panic, but a quiet need to touch something indisputably present. "Eastbound reefer on Ocean Way," she said softly. "Anybody out here on span 5 seeing a backup?" Silence at first, then a crackle and a faint voice bled through, warped by distance and the wet air. "Negative reefer. Eastbound just rolled off the causeway. Fog's bad, but lanes are clear. You stopped out there." She looked at the queue, still, dim, too varied in age and shape to belong to a single moment in modern traffic. "Yeah," she answered after a heartbeat. "Got a line of vehicles ahead. Think it might not be a now thing." The other driver laughed, a quick, incredulous sound that was more nervous than mocking. "Sounds like fog's got your brain playing tricks, partner. Keep both hands on the wheel and your eyes where the paint is. That bridge will mess with you if you let it." "I hear you," she said. She put the mic back. Outside, the line began to move. Not forward, not in any way she could see, but slowly, like breath expanding and contracting. The taillights brightened in unison for a second, as if brakes were being tapped in some forgotten rhythm. Then, one by one, they dimmed and went out, not all at once, but in no sequence she could track, as if the vehicles themselves were deciding, individually, to stop shining. The shapes remained, pale silhouettes in the fog, but their red punctuations faded. The entire tableau seemed to thin, the brightness of the fog around them growing stronger as their edges blurred. The advisory voice, too, was changing. "Once again, we urge motorists on span 5 to remain in your vehicles," it said, but the words crackled now with the wear of tape. A slight warble at the end of sentences. "State police and highway patrol are working to clear a collision near the center of the span. This is Harbor Authority on 5:30 a.m. Time is..." The next word stretched, wavered, then dissolved into static. The red lights ahead dimmed one more degree. Then, like candle flames snuffed in a gentle wind, they vanished, leaving only open road. There was no screech of metal, no rush of displaced air, no sudden clearing, no dramatic twist. One moment the queue existed as a soft impression on the concrete. The next, there was only fog, streetlights, and the painted lane drifting ahead into soft white. Cass sat for a second with her boot hovering over the pedal, feeling the engine idle steady. Then, with careful intention, she eased the truck forward. Her headlights swept the space where the last car had been. Nothing. No wet footprint on the pavement, no skid marks, no chunk of chrome. The road ahead looked as any empty stretch of causeway in fog might. On the radio, the signal faltered. A burst of static rolled through, then a different voice took its place, warbly for half a second, then settling into modern clarity. "Pete, there are no current closures on the Ocean Way Causeway," the new announcer said. "Visibility remains low, but traffic is flowing in both directions. Motorists are reminded not to stop on the spans. The 1987 collision remains one of the worst in state history, and is the reason this advisory frequency exists. Drive safely. This is Coastal Highway Authority on 5:30 a.m. The tape of the past had finally reached its end, or receded, or simply gone quiet. The present resumed. Span 6 came and went. The fog began, inch by inch, to lose its insistence. The halos around the lights spread wider, less opaque. A dark, flattened line began to suggest itself at the far edge of her vision, the outline of the port's distant cranes, their arms like metal trees reaching for the low sky. When she rolled off the last bridge onto solid ground again, the air felt different. The dampness was still there, but the pungent smell of low tide was diluted by diesel and cold metal and city pavement. Buildings materialized out of the haze, warehouses, stacks of containers, a ship in dock with its sides hulking like a shadowed wall. A sign pointed right toward a combined rest area and inspection pull-off, designed for trucks just off the causeway. It promised coffee, restrooms, and a small diner that stayed open all night to catch crews coming off the water. Cass turned in. The lot was about half full. A cluster of reefers hummed along one side, condensation curling off their units into the damp air. A couple of local day cab tractors sat with trailers dropped, waiting for morning shifts. The floodlights here were brighter, casting firm-edged shadows that felt almost startling after so much softness. She parked, set the brakes, and cut the main engine. The reefer continued its murmur, but the cab fell into a calmer loudness. Inside the rest building, warmth wrapped around her, carrying smells of coffee, frying onions, salt, and old linoleum. A television in one corner played muted news. A handful of people occupied the booths, dockworkers bending over late meals, a harbor cop in a reflective vest stirring sugar into his mug, another trucker scrolling through a phone. Cass ordered coffee and toast at the counter, hands still slightly chilled from the cab, then drifted toward the wall where framed photographs and clippings crowded for space. It was a museum of the causeway in miniature, black and white shots of the first sections under construction, color prints of ribbon cuttings and aerial views, newspaper headlines from storms that had closed the bridge. One yellowed article was larger than the rest, anchored with brass tacks at the corners. The headline read, 40-car pileup on Oceanway spanned 5 leaves, dozens injured. A photograph below showed a scene swallowed in gray. Faint shapes of crumpled cars lined up like dominoes, an older model tractor-trailer sideways across both lanes, emergency lights just pale smears in the fog. The caption under the photograph named the date, November 3, 1987. It mentioned visibility near zero, a chain reaction. The difficulty first responders had even reaching the scene. In a sidebar, a smaller column discussed new emergency advisory to be broadcast on 5:30 a.m. in future fog events. A quote from a harbor authority official, set off in italics, caught her eye. In conditions like that, the worst thing people can do is keep moving blindly. We'll be telling them over and over, stay with your vehicle, stay where you are. You are not alone on the span. Help is on the way. The phrasing was close enough to what she'd heard that it folded neatly into the same space in her mind. Another photograph, much smaller, showed a ferry dock in clearer weather, cars lined up nose to tail waiting to board. An old caption noted, before Causeway, Oceanway Ferry carried 200 vehicles a day across Foggy Bay. The ferry's hull bore a name, Harbor Queen. Its deck was crowded with a jumble of sedans and boxy station wagons, paint colors bright in the sunlight. The shapes of the waiting cars in that picture matched, in outline and distribution, the queue she had just seen on the bridge far more than any modern traffic line. She stood there a moment longer, coffee warming her hands. The murmur of conversation in the diner and the gentle clatter of cutlery anchored the present around her. Someone laughed at a joke she didn't catch. Outside, a horn gave a friendly double tap as a truck pulled through the lot. From the counter, the person working the register called out to her, "You run the Causeway tonight." "Yeah," she answered, turning. Fog was something else out there. Always is this time of year, they said. You hear the advisory. They never let folks forget 87. She nodded, heard more than I expected, I think. The cashier smiled faintly. My granddad swore he once heard voices from that night on the radio years after, called in from his boat all shook up, said it sounded like they were stuck in fog somewhere time hadn't caught up with yet. They shrugged lightly, as if dismissing their own story. Could have just been a tape got into the wrong loop. Could be he was tired. Could be, well. The shrug finished the thought. Cass lifted her cup, taste of burnt diner coffee suddenly comforting. Bridge remembers, she said, half to herself. That it does, the cashier replied. Has more stories than we do. Later, back in her cab, she sat for a moment before starting the engine. The causeway's glow, filtered through thinning fog, painted a faint, uneven line along the horizon. Above it, the sky was beginning to hint at a lighter gray, the barest premonition of dawn. She reached out and turned the radio back to 530. Static greeted her, flat and uninteresting. The advisory loops had likely wound down for the night, or she was just a shade too far from the transmitter. In the sift of noise, she thought, for a breath, that she caught the distant echo of a man's voice, unintelligible, more rhythm than content. Then it washed away, leaving only soft hiss. She left it there for a moment, then dialed the radio back to silence. The engine rumbled to life under her feet, the truck settling into its familiar stance. When she crossed the causeway in daylight on her next trip, the bridge looked exactly as it always did. Concrete spans, blue water, ships on the horizon. No hint of queues, no echoes of phantom lanes hovering off to the side. The markers for span 5 passed under her tires without comment. But on nights when the fog rose and the yellow lights above the start of the bridge blinked their steady suggestion to tune in, Cass would do so. She'd listen not just for the modern cautions, but for the faint, worn edges of older words tucked underneath. The ones that came from a time when headlights had glowed a softer red, bumpers had been real chrome, and the bay had demanded patience from those who crossed it by boat or by bridge. Out there between shore and shore, the road was more than concrete. It was repetition and reminder, story and warning, wrapped in white. And sometimes, in the thickest fog, it shared those stories with whoever happened to be rolling through, a quiet way of trying not to let one bad night become more. Story number 7. The interstate ran flat and straight across the plateau, an even gray ribbon floating above valleys and old river cuts. In the day, it felt almost too wide for the landscape. 4 smooth lanes laid over hills that used to force roads to twist and climb. At night under fog, it shrank back down to something smaller, more tentative. The shoulders softened, the horizon disappeared, and the big highway began to feel more like the narrow 2-lane that had once carried all this traffic on its own. Jonah had been out there long enough to know both roads by reputation. He started his career on the old U.S. highway, back when his company still routed freight along the slower route to serve the small towns. Those roads dipped into hollows, slid past gas stations with squeaking pumps and diners with low neon signs. Then the new interstate had opened, rolling right over the top of everything like a second story built on an old house. The traffic climbed up, the old route quieted down, and the miles went by a little quicker. Tonight he was on the higher road. The interstate's surface whispered under his tires, a calm, continuous hiss. Inside the cab, the dash glowed with quiet certainty, gauges steady, cruise control holding at a fog-appropriate 50. The heater brushed warm air across his legs. A thermos of coffee sat open in the cup holder, the smell a dark, familiar comfort. The CB was on but turned down to a murmur. Outside, the fog thickened. It had started as a light ground haze, a little brightness along the ditches, a soft halo around. Roadside reflectors. Then the plateau's long, shallow valleys had begun to collect it, the air in the low places turning milky. Now the whiteness had climbed to windshield height, eating the stars and the far shoulder, leaving Jonah in a muted world defined by whatever his headlights could show him. He watched the lanes shrink. The reflective paint of the center lines burned clear in his beams, flanked by the solid white edge marks. Beyond them, darkness and gray. Trees became suggestions, their trunks ghosting by as pale vertical streaks at the margins. The distant glow of small towns, usually pricking the horizon, was gone. It felt as though someone had folded the landscape up close to the truck, leaving just enough road to move forward. The highway signs came late and close now, rising out of the mist as blocks of green, their white letters appearing all at once in the bright wash of his lamps. He read them as they came, unconsciously mapping his progress. Exit 192, County 12/LAKVIW, 2 miles. Exit 192, 1 mile. Then another, smaller sign, one he didn't remember seeing on this stretch before. Old 41 Scenic Loop, next right. He frowned slightly. Old 41. That had been the designation before the interstate, the two-lane that now ran roughly parallel, dropping down into towns the new road skipped. Scenic Loop sounded like something a tourism board had decided on, a way to convince vacationers to go the long way around. He was not a vacationer, but old roads had a way of hanging around in logistics, too. Every driver of a certain age had heard some version of the same low-voice story at diners and fuel stops out here, about the old line that sometimes felt closer than it should, about nights when you could almost see the glow of another road's headlights sliding through the trees below, as if the past still ran its own traffic. Ahead, an overhead gantry emerged from the fog. Its rectangular sign panel glowed amber with words. Fog ahead. REDOCAD speed zone. Old 41 detour next right. Jonah checked the GPS screen mounted low on the dash, just to the right of the wheel. The map was a clean, minimal sketch, the interstate drawn as a thick blue line, the little arrow of his truck gliding along it. No detour was marked. The system showed no closures ahead, no warnings about accidents on this segment. He wasn't in the habit of ignoring his own eyes for the sake of a screen, but he wasn't in the habit of trusting every sign either. Temporary detours came and went. Glitches happened. The fog pressed closer. It was a valley fog, thick and low, the kind that rolled and pooled rather than dropped. He could feel the road sinking very gradually beneath him as the interstate followed the contour of a shallow depression. The CB crackled. "Anybody westbound past 190?" a voice asked, faint through the hiss. "How's that soup tasting out there?" Another voice replied, closer to Jonah's position. "Westbound at 184. Can't see my own trailer doors. Might drop for the night if it gets worse." The first came back with a short laugh. "You keep hearing about the old line. Boys at the last stop swear if the fog's thick enough, you'll see the other road the interstate stole its bed from." Jonah half-smiled despite himself. He'd heard it all right. Different details, same shape. Sometimes it was a full ghost road under the new one. Sometimes just odd glimpses, an extra set of taillights in the mirror that didn't belong to any known lane. He didn't chime in. He let the chatter drift past. The sign for exit 192 appeared out of the fog, its green face bright, its arrows clear. In the half-second when the ramp symbol came into his view, another panel flashed to life on the gantry just beyond. This one was smaller, with more specific lettering. Fog density high. Old 41 detour strongly recommended. Truck's okay. The words "strongly recommended" snagged his attention. The thought of rolling blind through a deeper fog in the valley ahead, with whoever else was out there, made the muscles in his jaw tighten. He watched the ramp approach. The curve to the right, the clean white line demarcating exit from mainline. The rain-slick surface shone in his beams. The decision point arrived, quiet and ordinary like all highway decisions. Stay with the high road, trusting that whatever lay in the white ahead would be manageable, or take the side route, older and likely slower, but maybe less congested. The truck sign on the advisory tipped the balance. He flicked on his turn signal and guided the rig into the exit lane. The ramp dropped. The angle of descent was steeper than the almost imperceptible grade of the interstate. As he coasted down, the fog thickened for a moment, swallowing even the faint glow of the overhead lights from above. Then he broke into a lower layer, the whiteness still dense, but now tinged slightly differently, grayer, closer. The pavement narrowed, shouldering in around him. The rumble of tires changed timbre as he left the broad, modern concrete and met older asphalt, patched, a little rougher. Trees pressed closer on either side, their trunks dark vertical bars glimpsed through the soft motion of the fog. At the bottom of the ramp a stop sign loomed, its red face damp and reflective. He slowed, stopped fully out of reflex as much as obedience. An old-fashioned shield sign hung beneath it, 41, black on white. The GPS screen shivered. The familiar blue line of the interstate, which had run straight and unwavering across the display for hours, now jinked oddly as his little arrow slid off it. For a heartbeat, it showed blank gray where his position should have been. Then a thin, pale line assembled itself under the arrow, curling off beneath the interstate's boulder route. Unnamed road, the program labeled it, where once it had said I-74. Jonah's fingers tightened slightly on the wheel. The instinct to turn back brushed him, but the detour sign had been clear, the ramp real. The road beneath him was solid. The fog moved no differently here than it did everywhere else tonight. He eased forward onto Old 41. The two-lane ran parallel to the interstate, shadowing its course but dropping into the land's older grooves. Here the road followed the lay of the ground more intimately, curling around low knolls, dipping into shallow hollows. The fog thickened at each dip, then grew gauzy on the slight rises, allowing him narrow glimpses of a darkness beyond the gray. Just enough to hint at fields, fence lines, the suggestion of distant tree limbs reaching up. His low beams painted the center stripe, faded and cracked, sometimes ghosting into invisibility where patches of tar had swallowed it. Old cat's eye reflectors glimmered now, and then in the middle of the lane, small glass circles that blinked back as his lights swept over them. He recognized, in a quiet part of his mind, the feeling he used to have in his early years, running tight state routes at night, aware of every curve's camber, every crown, every dip that might pool ice. The CB hummed softly. He left it on. After a few minutes, an oncoming set of headlights appeared ahead, far down the straight, small twin points blurred by fog. They approached at a measured pace, not too fast for the conditions but with a steady confidence. As they neared, the shape behind them took form. It was a car, but not any recent sedan. Long hood, squared-off roof, big chrome bumper. Its headlights were a warmer shade of white than hers, almost yellow. It passed on his left plenty wide, the fog softening its edges. For a second as it went by, the window line lined up with his. In that brief overlap, he saw a driver's silhouette, cap brim low, one hand on the big steering wheel. The radio inside the car glowed with dials marked by little orange lamps. The faint sound of some old tune, all croon and saxophone, leaked through the glass in the night. Then the car was behind him, tail fins, actual small fins at the rear, vanishing into the mist. Its taillights were round, jewel-like, not the blocky LEDs of current designs. Jonah let his breath go out in a slow, steady stream. Old cars still drove these roads, he told himself. Enthusiasts, restorers, folks who liked metal and lines from another time. People took their classics out on clear Sundays, but not many ran them through heavy fog after 2 in the morning on a forgotten detour. The road curved and another vehicle's glow appeared ahead. This one rode higher, wider, boxy but taller than the sedan, some kind of delivery truck. As it passed, he caught its side silhouette. A short, straight truck with rounded corners, painted in 2 tones, with a faded logo of a bread company he dimly remembered from childhood. Its side mirrors stuck out on thin arms, not the aerodynamic pods of modern rigs. The driver inside wore a coat with lapels and a tie, top button done, as if headed to church. Each encounter stole some of the familiar out of the night and replaced it with something layered. As though this road were not living in one year but in several at once, all laid on top of each other, only revealing themselves when the fog made the present thin. The GPS map's pale line twisted with the road ahead, but its labeling had reverted to blandness. No data, it told him at the top, off-network. He checked his side mirror. His own trailer loomed back there, a pale rectangle with his company's logo washed ghostly by reflected headlights. The name, Morrow & Son Haulage, ran along its side in big block letters. It was the same brand his father had painted onto the side of his first truck decades ago, when he'd left a factory job to haul on his own. For a moment, though, as the fog folded unevenly over the reflective vinyl, the letters looked wrong. The ampersand seemed larger than it should be, the typeface more ornate. The Son part appeared in a smaller script, tucked under the Morrow as if someone had added it later shyly. The color looked less crisp, more sun-faded. He blinked, the fog shifted. In the next glance, the logo appeared as it always did, clean, consistent, modern. The CB crackled, soft but persistent. "Old line's awake tonight," a voice said. Jonah's hand moved automatically to the mic, thumb resting on the button but not pressing yet. The voice on 19 carried a mild southern lilt, the kind of accent that sounded like red clay roads and porches with chairs on them. Older, calm, no particular urgency. He lifted the mic. "You talkin' about 41?" he asked. His own voice sounded steady enough. "Took the detour, fog's thick." "Yeah, you did," the voice replied. "High roads chewin' on itself up there. Whole mess of folks tryin' to outrun what they can't see. Down here's quieter." A short pause. "You westbound, Jonah." His name slid into the cab without fanfare, but it landed with weight. He hadn't given it. The CB handle he'd used for years was Morrow, after the name on his truck, after his father. Most folks on 19 knew him by that or by his unit number. Only at docks and offices did anyone use the name on his license. He swallowed, thumb still on the transmit switch. "Depends who's asking," he said carefully. The chuckle that came back was soft, almost fond. "Just someone who's run this stretch a long time. Fog likes your family, I guess. Road remembers names." Another vehicle approached from ahead then, its lights small and dimmer than the others. As it neared, he realized it was a bus. Not a modern motor coach, but the older style. Rounded front, big windshield, side windows like a school bus but dressed for travel. In the fog, its paint red as two tones separated by a chrome strip. The destination sign above the windshield glowed a soft, failing white. He caught only one word on it as it passed: Cleveland. The silhouettes of passengers sat in the glow inside, faint heads and shoulders. Some leaned against windows, some upright. None moved. "Your old man ever tell you about nights like this?" the voice on the radio asked. Jonah watched the bus slip by, taillights small, then gone. "He told plenty," he answered. "Said fog was like a bad memory. Shows you things you think you dealt with already." "That's one way," the voice said. He used to say something else too. Said the new road might ride over the old one, but sometimes the old one still knew the better way through. Seen him peel off more than once when the mainline got too clever for its own good. Jonah's fingers tightened subtly. "You knew my father." "Knew of him," the voice replied. Hard to miss a man who'd paint his own name on a truck and then back it up with miles. Morrow Sr. always gave the fog an extra mile or two of respect. The CB hissed softly around the words. Outside, the road slipped into a deeper hollow, the fog closing around the cab like cupped hands. The light from his beams seemed to bounce off a nearer surface, turning the world ahead into a more compressed tunnel. Up ahead, the twin glow of brake lights flickered on and off, a vehicle slowing. He eased back, toe light on the pedal. The car ahead came into clearer view, its shape fragmenting into reality. An old station wagon, two-tone, paint dulled, bumper chrome pitted. Its brake lights brightened again, then steadied. The car rolled to a stop at the side of the lane, a wheel edging onto the crumbling shoulder. No hazard lights flashed, no door opened. "Don't stop," the voice on the radio said, gently but firmly. "Don't swing wide to see if they need a hand. They're not in your night, you're just passing through theirs." The station wagon's rear window was full of fogged glass opacity. For an instant, though, as he crept past at a respectful distance, he thought he saw the suggestion of shapes inside. Luggage piled high, a child's rounded toy, a blanket folded neatly. A woman's profile, hair pinned up, face turned towards some point in the white beyond. Then the angle changed. His headlights slid off their glass. The wagon sank back into the gray. He exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "What happens if I do stop?" he asked quietly, thumb brushing the mic. "Maybe nothing," the voice said. "Maybe you sit on the side of a forgotten road and wait for a dawn that doesn't line up right with your logbook. Maybe you find yourself talking to folks who can't hear you, trying to explain a bridge that ain't been built yet." A pause, nearly a sigh. "Better to keep rolling, till you see a sign you recognize in the year you started from." Jonah's eyes went to the next roadside marker. It wasn't the usual slim green milepost he knew from the interstate. It was a larger, older rectangle mounted on two wooden posts, white paint flacking. Black letters read, RIDGFILD 12. Wilton 37. He frowned. Those names had been on maps once, he knew. One of them might still have a gas station with a single working pump, but distances were wrong. The interstate put Ridgefield much closer than 12 miles now. Fog slid along the glass, leaving trails of drops that caught the dash lights and broke them up. The road dipped again, then began to rise just perceptibly. Ahead, somewhere beyond the gray, the high road resumed its straight course. Up there, digital signs would be warning westbound drivers to slow, to use caution, to be aware of slick spots. Up there, the built world of rest areas and service plazas continued, brightly lit and regular. Down here, the old alignment threaded the bottoms, where fog used to linger longer because cars moved less fast, where the road had taken its time and so had everyone on it. The CB voice returned, a little quieter now. "'Bout another mile," it said. "Watch for the merge. Don't miss it. The old line'll keep going if you let it. She'll carry you places you can't deliver and can't log." "How will I know it?" Jonah asked. "You will," the voice said simply. "It'll feel like remembering something you haven't done yet, and you'll see your own lights twice." The line went silent. The road climbed. Gradually, almost shyly, the fog began to thin. Not much, not all at once, but in small, almost imperceptible streaks. The whiteness above his windshield took on a hint of darker gray, like cloud cover instead of pure blank. Then he saw it. Ahead and a little to the left, through a scrim of fog, a brighter patch of light glowed. It moved at exactly his speed, hovering at the edge of his vision like a reflection. Headlights, twin and distant, seemed to run parallel to him, hidden behind a stand of unseen trees. The hair on his arms prickled under his shirt. The road curved gently up and toward that glow, as if climbing a ramp laid alongside another. The center line shifted, angling, then straightening in the direction of the brighter patch. The shoulder on the right fattened briefly, becoming something more like an embankment than a ditch. A sign appeared at the edge of his beams, large and reflective, white letters on green. To I-74 West. Merge 14 mile. Below it, in smaller, older letters that looked as if they'd come from a different sign entirely, faded nearly away. Use at your own risk. Jonah felt the odd sensation then, the one the voice had tried to describe. like remembering a corner he hadn't yet rounded. His hands moved on the wheel before thought did, following the curve with an instinct that felt half-learned, half-shared. As he arced up, the bright patch of twin headlights ahead swung into his view more fully. For a heartbeat, it was like looking into a mirror laid flat along another lane. A truck ran there. Same make, same model, same trailer silhouette. Its marker lights glowed a familiar amber along the top edge. Its low beams pushed a tunnel through the thinning fog. In that brief sliver of angle, he saw its logo painted along the trailer's flank. Morrow & Son haulage, clear and crisp. As his road joined it, dissolving the invisible barrier between old lane and new, the other image slid into place perfectly with his own perspective. The sense of duplication collapsed into singularity. He was back on the interstate. The feel under his tires confirmed it. The smoother, broader expanse, the subtle rumble of expansion joints at regular intervals. Overhead, a modern gantry loomed, its panel lit with the familiar, impersonal message. Fog area. Reduced speed enforced. Lights on. He checked his mirrors. Only his trailer rode back there now, clean lines, modern fonts, his company's name exactly as it should be. The fog up here still drifted, but its density was less. He could see the faint glow of another vehicle's headlights a half-mile ahead, and the reddened blur of one further still. The CB crackled and a different voice came through. Younger, brisk. Westbound, watch your speed between 190 and 180. Troopers hidden in the soup, pickin' off folks thinkin', 45's a suggestion. Another chimed in, laughing. Ain't nobody hidden in that. They fogged themselves when they opened the door. I'm dropping off at the next exit. Need coffee before I start seeing deer where there ain't none. Jonah let their words wash over him like regular weather. At the next service plaza, 10 miles further on, he pulled off. The lot glowed with bright white lead poles, cutting the remaining fog into neat columns. Trucks lined up in orderly rows. He found a slot, backed in, set the brakes. The engine ticked in the cooling air. Inside, the plaza's interior felt almost garishly clear after the muted world outside. Fluorescent lights, tile floors, the smell of frying oil and strong coffee, TV news murmuring about markets and distant storms. On one wall near the restrooms, a large photograph caught his attention. It showed a stretch of road under construction, 2 lanes of fresh asphalt, white center dashes newly painted. Wooden forms for a future overpass rose in the background. Lined along the new pavement were several trucks from another era, rounded-nosed tractors, gleaming tanks, straight trucks with hand-painted logos. One of the trucks in the center bore his family name along its side in big block letters. Morrow haulage. No ampersand yet, no son, just the core name. The lettering style was almost, but not quite, the same as the one on his own trailer, a subtle echo from another time. The caption under the photo read, Opening of new US 41 alignment, 1962. Local haulers make first ceremonial run. His father's younger face stared out from the cab of that central truck, eyes bright, hand on the wheel. He'd been about Jonah's age then. Beside the photograph, a smaller plaque held a paragraph about the old road being paved and widened, about how it had changed travel for the region. Near the bottom, in smaller text, a line stood out. Portions of old Route 41 remain in use as scenic byways and alternate routes. Many drivers still prefer the old line during bad weather. Jonah stood there a moment, the sounds of the plaza fading into a hum. He could almost hear his father's voice, some memory of a half-joking warning. High roads are proud, his father had said once long ago, driving a 2-lane with fog hugging the ditches. Old roads know when to duck. Back in his cab, coffee steaming in the holder, he checked the GPS again. The route ahead was clean, no odd detours. The device logged his current position just where it should be. He flipped through his recent tracks, more out of curiosity than concern. The line of his night's drive traced smoothly along the interstate, a neat path. There was no aberrant little loop dipping off beneath it where he knew he had been. For a moment he considered that. Then, with a quiet acceptance, he let it go. Some roads recorded their own history on maps and in data. Others stored it in fog and in the subtle, shared memories of people who ran them long enough. As he pulled back onto the interstate, the fog lifting by degrees, dawn just beginning to put a gray edge on the clouds to the east, Jonah felt that odd looseness in his chest turn into something like gratitude. The old line had let him pass through, had nudged him away from whatever tangle the high road had been working out for itself up there in the thickest white. Miles ahead, the highway unfurled, familiar and wide. Beneath it, perhaps, the older road still wound its quieter path, ready to rise a little closer on nights when the new lanes forgot how to be careful. He set his hands lightly on the wheel, the engine humming cooperative and strong, and rolled on into the thinning mist, carrying with him the echo of a voice on the CB and the faint sense of another truck's lights, once beside him, now folded back into the history of the road.